Good afternoon. Good afternoon. There's nothing I love more than timeliness, so that's going to count for me too today. We got a lot to get going. First of all, welcome. Very happy to see you all. Good afternoon. Good. All right, there we are, audience participation. Love it. Look, these are challenging times. I want to acknowledge that straight up, and that's why I view it as really important to be in the community in which we are, where we have an opportunity to address many of the challenges that we're facing, opportunity to build solutions together. This is an opportunity for us to hear from each other about the work that we have going on. This is partly for the center's purpose so that we understand how we can help you in that work, how we can help communicate your successes, and also how we can collaborate further together. Okay, the most important points for today are that you know the drill. It's going to be lightning talks. We're serious about the 5-minute timer. Stephanie's going to be running the 5-minute timer. You're going to be able to see the time when the time is up. We're going to say awesome and clap you off. Everybody knows how to play the game. And now that includes me. I have a few things to say kind of further beyond this welcome. And yeah, I'm going to be on the timer as well, just like everybody else. I just put a few images of some of the folks, some of the projects, some of what's happening. This has been a crazy time in many respects. I think when we look back on mostly what happened in the past 2 years, it's really been about 3 years in total since the start of the center, about really 2 years for many of you. Most of you folks know that clock very well. It was 100 projects that we've stood up from the center, mostly in that 2-year time period, which then I was like, that means standing up one, between Pam and I and many others, one almost every other week here in the center. So a lot going on. Just a reminder about kind of some of our core areas of work in climate adaptation, nature-based solutions, social vulnerability, and communications as our priority areas. We've also been developing a little bit of this wheel here, and we're revising it along the way, and probably will revise it after some of the talks today, where this is really just meant to highlight some of the work ongoing in these different areas. So trying to do as much as we can to encapsulate some of the great projects. And I'm just going to say again that we expect to learn a lot today about some of the progress you're making so that we can also continue to advance these communications. So that's going to be a very important part of what we do. I want to officially announce for today that we have just been beginning to run our new supercomputer, Elkhorn, and we're just finishing some beta testing on it. It's located up in the Washington State facility, and it'll be available soon for climate researchers across campus. The resources are really substantial. They're about 4 times what the current Hummingbird is across campus. And so we hope that this really helps folks who are doing climate research. And ultimately, if there are downtimes on it, it'll be open a little more widely soon up. But for starters, available for climate research, and you'll be able to apply soon. Put a little draft image. We'll have a nice logo for this. The Elkhorn in this logo is obviously partly about Elkhorn Slough and the wetlands. A bunch of us work on corals and how to protect populations, so it's also about Elkhorn corals, which were some of the very first runs on the computer. And of course, elk were native to these areas when they were managed by indigenous peoples. Meant to try to cover, in a logo, a good bit of what we care about in our work overall. You'll hear just a little bit more, I assume, from Heather about the Economic Futures Forum early next month, and then wanted to point out that like we have been at UN Oceans Conference, we will also be at UNFCCC, the Climate COP, in just under a month and counting. You can find more information, videos. You've probably seen our website a whole bunch. And with that, glad to see you all. Thank you very much. And then I'm just going to announce first names because I assume that you're going to have titles on up there. So Anne, take it away.
Thank you. Let me make sure you can hear me. This implementation project links aquaculture, agriculture, and restoration to enhance coastal resilience at Pie Ranch's Cascade Ranch site. We adapted an ancient practice to the present day. Called IAA, it integrates aquaculture with agriculture, and studies indicate its potential to improve water use efficiency, reduce fertilizer costs, stimulate soil microbial communities, and diversify foods produced. We asked, how does biologically filtered effluent from rainbow trout recirculating aquaculture influence native plant propagation? We had 4 objectives: establish recirculating aquaculture systems at the Cascade Ranch site, measure impacts of fish effluent on native plants propagation, quantify water use efficiency of the IAA system, and propagate plants selected by the Amundsen Land Trust for culturally relevant foods and for stream bank restoration to replace fire-spreading eucalyptus. We established 2 recirculating aquaculture systems and stocked them with fish after troubleshooting multiple obstacles. Bacteria in each system's biological filter convert the fish's toxic ammonia waste to nitrate, allowing water recirculation into the fish tanks and providing a good form of nitrogen for plants' roots uptake when we discharge some of the water. Fish received our lab's ocean-friendly microalgae blend diet, which also recently showed better fish performance and lower environmental and economic impacts than commercial feed in a large state hatchery trial. 3 propagation experiments, each with a different plant species, compared effects of watering young plants with fish effluent versus with the ranch's typically used well water. We destructively sampled half the plants for scientific analyses and provided the rest for outplanting. Fish had high survival and good growth in both aquaculture systems during the plant experiments. For variables analyzed so far, in the red flowering current, fish effluent, F, versus well water, W, led to significantly greater levels of plant growth variables, 2 forms of soil nitrogen, and survival. Similarly, fish effluent led to significantly greater responses in most variables for Western dock. And fish effluent also led to greater stem plus leaf weight, soil nitrogen, and total nitrogen in Pacific willow. It's the Pacific willow that will be going to the stream bank restoration. For all 3 experiments, analyses are underway for more soil chemistry variables, plant mineral composition, and soil microbiome. We also estimated water use efficiency as net yield per consumptive water use. Fish effluent led to substantially higher water use efficiency for combined yield of fish and plants, the much higher blue bars. Omitting fish growth from the yield calculations still led to higher water use efficiency in fish effluent treatments. Those are the yellow bars. So these results show benefits of IAA for enhancing climate resilience on coastal farms. First, we found that fish effluent led to better native plant performance at the propagation phase. We got more crop per drop, that is greater water use efficiency by integrating aquaculture wastewater with the native plant propagation. And we now aim to explore integrating farm pond aquaculture, where you raise the fish in ponds, with plant production in order to reduce the complexity of managing the aquaculture part of the IAA. We got all this done through great teamwork by UCSC research specialists, undergrads, and a PhD student, and our awesome Pie Ranch collaborators. And I want to give huge thanks to the CCCR for funding, as well as from the Robert Headley Presidential Chair. And finally, sincere thanks to the Alamutsun Land Trust for selecting the plant species and approving us to do this work on the lands they steward. On time, ahead of time.
In general format, the questions are going to be at the break period. So we've got breaks every hour. Where'd my talk go? All right. Next up, Joji. And then just to give folks just a head up, Natalia, you're after Joji. Okay, perfect.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joji Muramoto, Cooperative Extension Organic Specialist. I'm going to talk about a few trials we are doing at on-farm experiments on the campus for the last 3 years. The hand-scale no-till practice, that's the focus of our experiment. And this is a grassroots organic practice for gardens and use a large amount of compost to grow crops and suppress weeds. And then require low initial investment for tractors and everything. So that's becoming popular across the United States. However, limited scientific data on the effect of carbon sequestration, productivity, and overall soil health. So we're trying to evaluate those things. And then we established 2 replicated trials. One is Alan Chadwick Garden on the campus, established almost 60 years old organic garden, and farm garden, 50 years old. And we monitor changes in soil organic carbon, soil health, and so forth. And this experiment evolved for the last 3 years. First year, we established trial, just very simple, till and no-till for replicates with a modest amount of compost. We didn't increase too much to begin with, but the second year, we realized, well, to this method to function, we need to add more compost. So by learning from local growers. So we increased the compost 100 tons per acre, which is like a 2 inches thickness. And the third year, we got a new faculty, Hannah Waterhouse, and she started the tractor scale field no-tillage experiments. So we decided to coordinate the field scale trial and hand scale trial. So that's why we increased the subplot like this. And then now we have a subplot with and without compost. Briefly, the Chadwick Garden and the farm garden soil profile. As you see here, Chadwick Garden has like twice as much organic matter than farm garden to begin with. I just want to show you the brief data about this carbon sequestration. Probably that's the most interesting for you guys. Then this is a Chadwick example. Left side is the baseline, and the blue is no-till and red is till. And then 2 years later, after more than 100 tons per acre of compost, that's increased. But if you see that just difference between 2 treatments, as you see there, blue no-till increased the topsoil a little bit, but the second layer, the till plot has more. So tillage practices change the distribution of carbon across soil profile. However, if you see the whole profile, there's no significant difference at this point. And one of the reasons we kind of reluctant to increase the compost rate, as we increase the compost, other nutrients also comes in, especially phosphorus. And then high phosphorus in soil can cause the eutrophication of surface water system. So we'd like to limit, and we need to keep monitoring. And as you see here, red bar is recent sampling, definitely increasing available phosphorus level. So we have much more to do. And then I expect a couple more years to observe effect of tillage and compost application. And this practice, although require less initial investment, we learned it's very labor intensive and compost intensive. And then good thing is we developed the foundation of the coordinated trials. We just want to thank for funding for CCCR and also got funding from State Organic Program, CDFA, and many wonderful collaborators. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there you go. Natalia, and then Heather, you're next up.
All right. Hi, everyone. I think we're going to shift gears a little bit to something that's more modeling based. I'm here on behalf of the PIs. Main PI is Erica Zavaleta, and I'm Natalia Ocampo-Peñuela from Environmental Studies, and we have two co-PIs from Computer Science and Engineering, Luca de Alfaro and Tyler Sorensen. This work was mostly conducted by the postdoc that was funded under this grant, Blessing Kavu, who has since moved on to a position in Finland, so he can't be with us today. And then very much advised by our senior researcher, Blair McLaughlin, who works with Erica Zavaleta. And importantly, all that I'm going to present today was very much powered by undergraduate students that were advised by Blessing, myself, and Luca and Tyler. And so the background to this is that California has committed, like other states and countries, to protect 30% of its land and water under equitably managed and well-connected protected areas that are supposed to conserve and restore biodiversity, expand access to nature, and mitigate and build resistance to climate change. And so where we place these areas is quite important. And what we were trying to do is build a tool that would allow stakeholders to place these areas in places that would fare really well in the future, or perhaps to know that they won't fare very well in the future. So the overall goal was to design an interactive, map-based climate change scenario exploration tool that would be co-designed to enable widespread exploration of how those decisions made today affect long-term climate resilience for coastal California's biodiversity. And so I'm going to very quickly go through this, but basically we paired up with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Amamutsan Land Trust to identify what would be species that they would want to map and understand where the distributions would be in the future to understand how conservation decisions would affect that. So we selected the species, and they were very interested in trees, and so everything that we ended up modeling was trees. I'm a bird person, so I was a bit bummed, but in the model specifications, what we managed to do is sort of model tree distribution in conjunction with seed dispersal by birds and mammals. And we did this powered by an algorithm called Ecoscape that Luca de Alfaro and myself have developed over the last 4 years to map habitat connectivity in present times. But what we did with California Futures, which is this tool, is to map it into the future. So map connectivity of trees in the present and the future and see how protected areas have fared in these different scenarios. And then we developed our tool that we call California Futures. And so the idea is that you can map the connectivity of a tree right now, and then you can say what's going to happen under the most conservative climate scenario or the most extreme climate scenario. And if I protect something or restore something, how would that fare in the future? And we do this, of course, with a modeling base, so we can't really know what's going to happen. But we wanted a tool that would allow for multiple species models, different time periods for people to explore their actions so that they can actually draw things and see how that would change outcomes, and also different climatic scenarios. And so we've designed, as I said, very much powered by undergraduates in computer science and engineering, this tool called California Futures that allows you to do all those things. So it's basically you select the species at the top, and I'm going to show you a video that was prepared by an undergrad, like a demo of the tool. You can choose your time period, your climate scenario. You can choose if you see the habitat and the projection of the dispersers, so the birds and mammals that disperse these trees. The trees are 2 oaks and a pine tree. Or you can choose only to see the habitat, and you can basically like just shift through things and see like what happens if I do this, what happens if I do that. So it's a bit of like scenario exploration. So I'm just gonna leave you with the demo that should be like a minute long, and if not, we can cut it at the beginning. It has some audio that I don't think we can hear very well. Let's see, is it running? Can't tell if it's running or not.
In the Exploring
there we
Actions
go.
tab, we can model the conservation actions between species.
So you can
We can
barely
start
hear
by
it, but basically you can
selecting
select the
species
species
in the
there, and so you can see the 3 that we did. But potentially you can
We are then presented
upload
with
all
different
other species.
parameters
We've
to
done
choose
birds,
from.
we've done mammals.
You can
Here you
choose
choose
the
your
different
time period. So if you
period,
want it for now, 2050 or 2090, because those are the scenarios that CDFW
and
has
we
told
can
us
change the
would be useful
visibility
for
of the
them. You can
dispersers
see the
and habitat
habitats.
layer.
And then you can draw and sort of see what
We
would
can
happen
also
if you
use the
add
draw
or
tool
remove habitat,
to
and then it
add
reruns
or
the
remove the
connectivity.
habitat,
And it's so fast because
and
it's
this
run
will
on
compute
GPU,
the
so we'll be using the
connectivity
Elkhorn hopefully
that
soon to run
added or
these
removed
type of
region.
models. But
Once the
basically, it's just a tool
connectivity
to
has been
put in the hands of
computed,
stakeholders to
the
explore
user can switch
outcomes of
between the
different
original
conservation decisions now
and the
and in
modified
future
layer
climatic scenarios.
using the button in the top right.
Yeah, I think that's it.
The user
1
can
second left.
also select what layers they want to be visible.
And then I think Sonia, do I have that
And
right?
finally, the
Standing
user
in for
can use the
Sydney.
reset button.
So there we go.
Thank you. Questions? Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Tallis. I'm a senior fellow with the center, and I'm going to talk today about increasing investment in Indigenous-led sustainability solutions. I have European ancestors. I'm not Indigenous to where I live here in California, but I am on my own lifelong journey to be an ally to Indigenous communities, and that starts with just recognizing sovereignty and their human rights, but also in my professional sphere, I work on conservation and climate investments. And obviously, we know increasingly that Indigenous communities are bearing the brunt of both the climate and nature loss crises and still receiving very little of the overall investment that's now growing rapidly to billions of dollars, both in the climate and conservation sphere. Indigenous communities are still getting less than 1% of climate funding, and less than 17% of conservation funding goes to Indigenous lands, with even less of that going to the Indigenous communities themselves. So obviously we still have a major gap in connecting Indigenous communities to the conservation and climate finance that exists today, but also in there being opportunities and conversations about what their concepts of economics and finance are that could be leading our next generation investment mechanisms that we're all looking towards for solutions. So I have had the extreme pleasure over the last year of working on developing this summit that's happening next month, the Economic Future Summit, focused on investing in Indigenous-led sustainability solutions. It'll be November 4th to 6th in San Francisco at Fort Mason. We're hoping for around 350 people, half Indigenous and half non. So far, our registration is tracking that. And we're very excited to bring those people together across a wide range of interests and types of actors, from Indigenous communities and leaders, local, state, and federal and tribal governments, the private sector and nonprofit organizations, as well as academia. And I have been really, really enjoying and benefiting from co-leading this with two phenomenal Indigenous leaders, Gwen Bridge, who's a member of the Satellite Cree Nation, and James Rattling Leaf Sr., who's a member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe. We're also very honored to be working with Craig Castro of the Ramaytush Ohlone Association. They are the original residents of San Francisco, which they call Yelamu, and we've been working closely with him in designing the summit. We also have an incredible advisory council with Indigenous and non-Indigenous leaders from climate and conservation finance that are guiding us in putting this together. So what we're hoping to do with the agenda that's come together now is really cover the arc of where both Indigenous communities and investors are today. So starting with where we are in the current situation with our roots of existing investment and finance options for climate and conservation. How can we better connect Indigenous communities to those financing opportunities? How can we better connect investors to those communities that want to engage? That's our first track, and you can see some of the specific sessions that will dig into those issues. Then we know that's not the full range of solutions that Indigenous people want to have an opportunity to be leading on, and it's not sufficient for us to meet our climate and conservation goals. So the second track is on starting to evolve what's available, and we're going to be highlighting emerging models of Indigenous-led funds, Indigenous-led banking systems, and other mechanisms across the value chain. And then really moving towards the stars and the future that we can evolve together. The third track is really on helping people understand and have access to and discuss together what Indigenous concepts of economics and finance are and how we can engage with those in our current climate and conservation systems. Across those themes, we have an incredible set of keynote speakers who will be inspiring us and bringing the conversations forward, and also 3 pathways to action, 4, that are really important for helping us move the impacts beyond the summit itself. So each of those is led by a partner that will be taking a product that's co-developed in the summit away, sharing it more broadly with their communities and networks, and continuing the work. We're also going to have fun. We have an evening event at the California Academy of Sciences that they're generously sponsoring, where I cannot tell you how excited I am. We are going to have the Hallucination, and even if you don't come, please look them up and listen to their amazing music. They are formerly the Tribe Called Red, and they are a phenomenal DJ duo, and we'll have a lot of engagement that evening. We also have some optional field trips to further engage and deepen the conversations. So obviously, I want to thank the people who've given us the sponsorship and trust and support to bring this together, starting with Mike, who gave us our original planning grant that was really significant for us to have the bandwidth and the space to develop this, all the other sponsors that have come in after that. And you can volunteer if you want to come for free. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Sonia, and then after that, Georgia.
Hi, everyone. I'm not Sydney. My name is Sonia. I'm filling in today for Sydney, who last minute, she felt sick this morning. So I'll be using Sydney's slides to update you about our project called Supporting Meaningful Community Participation for Climate Justice in Pajaro. So why is community involvement important for climate planning? Because it creates a more prepared and active public who can then participate in more meaningful policy and governance. But also in the context of climate justice, this is important to disrupt the status quo of uneven participation and uneven representation and voice in these conversations around climate solutions. But inclusion alone does not guarantee climate justice. This also depends on the quality of participation. And so our project stems from the premise that meaningful community participation in climate planning processes depends on the ability of community members to be able to recognize the links between climate change and problems in their community, and also the impacts of climate change as a form of injustice. And we ask these questions in the context of Pajaro, which is an unincorporated agricultural community neighboring us in Monterey County that has a long history of climate injustice, including a devastating flood that occurred in March 2023. And since the flood, Pajaro has received increased support for climate change adaptation, and many of these projects have included a community engaged component. However, when past initiatives have asked for residents to provide their input on proposed solutions, many of them have struggled to propose concrete long-term solutions. And much of this is because there is a disconnect. There is a lack of resources and education connecting the ongoing problems in Pajaro to the concept of climate change. And so kind of illustrating this issue, Maria Elena de la Garza, who's the CEO of the Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County, she said, throughout all of the conversations we've had with residents since the flood, no one has ever mentioned climate change. So our project sought to fill this gap by increasing community capacity to inform climate adaptation, by building community members' understandings of both the problems of climate change and their visions for climate justice in the future. And to do this, we developed and facilitated a 20-hour climate justice course for a cohort of 18 farm workers who are members of the Pajaro community, and the course content had to do with climate change impacts, action and policy in a local context, and then also leadership skills for future climate advocacy. And so there are 3 main points in our climate curriculum. The first is that there are links between the ongoing community problems in Pajaro's community and climate and environmental changes. Second, that there are institutional and structural root causes of climate injustice and environmental injustice that are contributing to these problems. And then lastly, we wanted to highlight a long history of community-led advocacy and resistance in Pajaro locally. And while we are still assessing the outcomes of the course, some of our preliminary findings are that residents have a broader conception of climate injustice and that they're able to articulate the relevance of climate change to ongoing problems in Pajaro. So for these community members, right now that includes economic and health and housing insecurity. And they are able to articulate the links between these issues with climate and environmental injustice. They also can articulate the types of changes that are needed at the structural and institutional levels. And lastly, that recognizing the link between the challenges going on in their community creates the possibility for action that addresses the root causes. And so this is still a work in progress. In future iterations, we are now working on a Mixteco round of the course, which was given in Spanish. And then lastly, we want to compare how climate change solutions have changed before and after the course, and also residents' local definitions of their visions for climate justice. And I'd like to thank the CCCR and our community partners at the Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County. Thank you.
Really appreciate you stepping in. Thank you, Georgia. And then Spencer.
I'm gonna try to see if this works. No, it doesn't. Okay, that's fine. All right, everybody. My name is Georgia Vasey. I'm a PhD student with Dr. Karen Hull, and I'm going to give you an update on our coordinated fire for coastal prairies. So again, I gave you some background in the last talk, but the goal of our grant was to develop a regional grassland fire management guide here in San Mateo, Santa Cruz, and Monterey counties. And so first and foremost, we wanted to compile the existing literature on coastal prairies, specifically in California, as well as fire management. And then we were also going to develop a spatial tool where we could pull together all of the various layers like climate, burn severity, et cetera, so that it can be used as a mapping tool for planning. We also wanted to include new research on monitoring prescribed burns. And then we also wanted to connect the various land managers, fire specialists, anybody who's interested in fire management in our area to come together through workshops. So one large part that I'm going to be talking to you today is our results from this survey that I did on investigating how burns affect both the vegetation and below ground carbon storage. And so I had 9 paired burned and unburned sites throughout San Mateo to Monterey counties, in which I had 10 transects, 5 in the burn and 5 in the control, where I sampled right before the burn, right after the burn, and in spring during peak greenness. Here are some of the things that we would measure. So on the top is your fuel metrics, which was primarily in the fall. And then for vegetation, it was percent cover, as well as a belt transect for species richness. For that change in soil carbon, it was the immediate change, as well as in the spring with root biomass. And for 4 of the 9 sites, we did a seed bank trial. So I'm going to give you some results on here with our results. It's not everything, but for vegetation, you have, okay, that doesn't work, change in vegetation cover on the y-axis, and then the different plant guilds on the x-axis, like native perennial forbs. And what you can see is that there wasn't much difference between the burn and the control, burn in orange and blue as control, except for that non-native annual forbs did seem to increase post-fire. For our species richness, we also saw a decline in both the control and the burn, but with slightly more of a decrease in our burn with about 3 species relative to the control with around 3 species, 6 to 3 species, excuse me. For below ground, this is the immediate change in soil carbon, which is on the y-axis. And then on the x-axis is days since rainfall, with all the points representing our sites. And so what you can see here is that soil carbon immediately post-fire did increase at the sites that were drier at the time of the burn, whereas that was not the case at some of our wetter burns. And then for root biomass, which again was sampled in the spring post-burn, overall you can see that for 4 of our sites, we are seeing this increase in below ground root biomass. However, one of our sites is kind of different, and we think that that's because it's our only site that was also grazed. So ultimately, fire is not, unfortunately, increasing native cover, and so we need to consider applying it with other management strategies. So this might be herbicide or reseeding or planting. And for below ground, it's really context dependent. However, we are seeing this increase in root biomass. Whether that stays into year 2 is TBD. All right, our workshops have been incredibly successful. We had 4 workshops, and this was our final one in September that was in person with representatives of over 30 different agencies. Thank you to Saul Villegas, who took these awesome photos. But this consisted of breakout groups, key stakeholders like CAL FIRE and state parks, as well as our own lightning talks on research and fire management that we had Q&As for. And then our guide, we've put together this amazing website. Please check it out. As you can see, we synthesized literature, which is under prairie fire ecology, as well as our land manager toolkit is a hub of all these various resources for fire practitioners. And it's also accessible on mobile devices because it was built on WordPress by our own Lauren Owen. So thanks to her. And finally, this just shows you our mapping tool that we developed. Again, we have over 70 layers. This was mainly a student, Ashley Neiman, who put this together, and all of these tutorials to hopefully inspire people to actually use this tool and think about it from a spatial scale. So with that, I just want to give a huge thank you to the CCCR for funding this amazing working group. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, hope to show you guys more updates in the future. Thank you.
Great, Spencer, and then Aaliyah.
Is it just next slide maybe?
Yeah, should be.
Rotate down, there we go.
Yeah. Sorry.
And slideshow. All right. Oh, should have been from current slide. So we got to go back to slide 60. Hold on. Sorry about that. Well, I guess I'll start by first introducing myself. My name is Spencer Schubert, and I'm a postdoc in the Environmental Studies Department. Today I'm going to be introducing and really giving some highlights about a project that we've been doing over the past year or so from current slide here. Excuse me. Sorry, George, that's George's stuff. Yep, that's good. So we're going to start the story off with the world's growing interest in trees. So we're in the UN Decade of Restoration, and we also have the multiple initiatives globally that are meant to commit to planting hundreds of billions, if not a trillion trees. And so one of the things that this is, in addition to promising nature-based solutions for this objective, there's many co-benefits that are sort of promised by tree growing that we have yet to see whether or not these are going to be delivered. And so our project studies a cohort of leading private sector institutions that we refer to as intermediary organizations. And these are basically large NGOs and businesses that are raising funding in a variety of ways, crowdfunding from market-based systems, and as well as from corporate sponsorships to plant and grow trees across the world at large scales using networks of local implementing partners. And so these initiatives hold enormous potential, but are also, there are many documented cases of high-profile failures that challenge us to reflect on how this kind of work should be done. Most critically, the public and funders need to be better informed about tree growing campaigns so they can support work that is effective, ethical, and transparent. And so our work seeks to understand how organizations both recognize and commit to key areas of restoration, and conservation experts agree should form the basis for scientific guidelines for best practices. And so we're addressing such issues as how organizations are committing to their projects long-term, observing various social and ecological safeguards, and transparency overall regarding their funding and monitoring in the long term. And the way that we've done this is we've actually done this global review is with a focal set of organizations, 128 organizations that we have reached out to with a 29-question survey. And we clearly communicated that we wanted this survey to basically generate information that would go public about organizations' policy commitments around these various criteria that I've described. And we did get 55% participation from these organizations, which was really encouraging. However, there was some 58 or so organizations that we reviewed exclusively based on the information that we could find based on their web-based materials, standard documentation, and annual reports, as well as a variety of other systematic target searches that we used to fill the gaps in this kind of information to address these questions as best we could. And so, am I on the right slide here? So, yes. So yet another website for you. In addition to putting together a manuscript with our findings, we're also collaborating with environmental news outlet Manga Bay and the company Visuality to produce a public platform that guides users through our findings. It's not quite available yet, but I'm going to show you a quick preview. The platform provides profile information for all organizations reviewed and breaks down the complex criteria into 4 summary categories: ecological, social, financial, and permanence. And so you can see that these circular bar charts here show the distribution of those scores along those criteria corresponding to the categories, as well as plenty of contextual information about that organization's background and goals. But from this, we can also break down the results from our survey in the specific itemized criteria that we looked at with our survey questions. So this can relate to, for example, how organizations have established policies or for project standards, things such as land tenure verification, monitoring practices, and in other, I should acknowledge here that most of these data are primarily self-reported by organizations and reflect only nominal commitments rather than their realized work, but it presents a basis for the public and for other stakeholders to hold organizations accountable to what they are essentially promising throughout their campaigns. Now, we do have, however, numerous components of this data that have a validation component. And so the one thing that we kind of want to understand from this is if organizations have claims about how they monitor projects long-term, then they should have data that correspond and substantiate this kind of monitoring commitment. And so the most basic level of this is, okay, well, we may know, however, that they plant a certain number of trees. They might have a different case examples of how they're going through this. But what we really wanted to get a sense of is how they have availability of these data. And I think I'm out of time here. But I'm going to go ahead and leave you with that little cliffhanger and invite you to talk to me later if you want to learn more about our findings. So.
Didn't bring my last stuff.
Hi everyone, I'm Alia Khan. I'm a PhD student in the Peyton Lab in the Earth and Planetary Sciences Department, and I'm here to present on behalf of Adina, my PI today, to talk about some of our work in the Elkhorn Slough, looking at wetlands as a nature-based climate carbon solution. So we're all aware of the urgent need to decarbonize and to reduce the residual carbon emissions in our atmosphere because we have enough CO2 in the atmosphere that is going to remain and enough industries that can't readily decarbonize. We need to turn to carbon dioxide removal. And today I'm going to talk about coastal blue carbon, which is a nature-based way to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and store it long-term in the sediments of wetlands. So there's 3 blue carbon ecosystems, marshes, mangroves, and seagrasses. These are named because of their ability to store carbon, and they're estimated to sequester up to 50% of the ocean's carbon in the sediment, despite only taking up about 2% of the Earth's land area. And so we're doing this work down in the Elkhorn Slough, and we have 3 different field sites that are representing a range of different parameters that we see in a range of the different land use types on the slough. And some of the big issues that occur in the slough are the prevalence of these mudflat regions, which are all the brown areas. So we're trying to explore what are the different impacts of types of land management, convergent to mudflat, and restoration. So we have 3 main field sites that we're working in. One of them is a mudflat. This site is tidally locked and has been since the 80s. The next one is a reference site. This is a fairly healthy, controlled site directly adjacent to a restoration. So the restoration was formerly a mudflat, and about 8 years ago, they brought in sandy sediment from a nearby hill slope to try and create a more resilient marsh that could stand against sea level rise. So the restoration had formerly drowned because of sea level rise, and they've raised up the marsh plain to withstand the next 100 years, and it's being slowly revegetated. And so there's a lot of different ways that we're studying it, and our goal is generally to characterize the entire carbon cycle in all of these different marshes. And so we use eddy covariance, subsurface carbon measurements, microbial measurements, which Leah will talk about after me, and surface water carbon measurements. So on the greenhouse gas measurements, we use a combination of eddy covariance towers, which measure our methane and CO2 flux, as well as smaller scale chamber measurements, which can pick up like individual hotspots of methane and carbon emission, and also provide information on nitrous oxide, which our eddy covariance towers can't do. Subsurface, which provides us some mechanistic understanding of the processes that drive this in the pore water, where a lot of our methane and CO2 are produced. And that's what that looks like. We collect cores and then draw out the pore water. And then looking at our lateral carbon exchange, which is the carbon that is exported to and from the ocean via the surface water, and that's generally coming from the pore water. And we want to know how much of it might be going to the ocean. So some of the preliminary results, we are having good news from our restoration site. So on the left, we have the mudflat. This one is still totally degraded. Then our reference site, which is our healthy site. And so this is our annual net CO2 flux. So since it's negative, that means that we're seeing net sequestration of carbon dioxide. So our reference site is sequestering the most carbon dioxide. But even just a couple years out after the restoration, we see that the restoration, even though it's not completely revegetated, is surpassing the mudflat for its sequestration potential. And so this is the average from 2003 and 2004, but we're seeing this improve every year, and the restoration site becoming a more effective carbon sink. And then some of the ways that we're applying this research, it will be to look at ways that we can improve marsh restoration. So we've started an experimental study looking at biochar as a potential fill for marsh restoration. This would have some benefits, like it's less heavy to bring out into the marsh, and it might provide an additional organic carbon source to improve the sequestration. And so we're doing some experimental studies in the field to look at that. But the key findings so far, wetland restoration can have a really significant effect on carbon burial and on lateral carbon fluxes, and it has been really successful at improving greenhouse gas reduction. Wetlands are capable of sequestering more carbon than we previously thought, primarily through those surface water exports. And since restoration is being included in the carbon market, this is a really essential thing to study. Thank you, guys.
Leah, and then Chase, and then we'll take a break.
Hi, I'm Leah Van Dyke. I am a grad student in Adina Paytan's lab as well. I also have received the CCCR grad student fellowship. My project is on microbial communities driving carbon sequestration in coastal wetlands. And this is the team that I work with from the Lawrence Livermore and Los Alamos National Laboratories on this project. So microorganisms play an important role in chemical exchanges between wetlands and the atmosphere. Especially with respect to carbon dioxide, microorganisms break down organic matter and release CO2 into the atmosphere. You also have some microorganisms generating methane, which gets released. So there's a lot of interesting carbon transformations going on with the microbial communities there. So some of the things I wanted to look at is how does restoration impact microbial community structure and function? Who are the most active in cycling carbon? And what microbial populations are also playing a role in methane release. And the way I do that is with microscopy. I use stable isotope probing and targeted assessment of genes associated with methane cycling in the slough. So my projects all kind of focus on three main sites: a flooded site, also called North Marsh, and then a restored site, sorry it's so low quality, and a reference healthy site to kind of study how the community changes along a gradient of flooded to restored. Yeah, so to do these analyses, I take soil cores in triplicate. For these activity analyses, I add a heavy oxygen isotope and incubate to see incorporation of DNA. Microbes incorporate oxygen from water into their DNA, and if they're actively replicating, they'll be incorporating that heavy isotope in. And I can use that to quantify an EAF value. Oh, it's done anoxically, which is shown there. It's basically just a measure of activity. And what I found was that the most active ASVs, just looking at the top 25, are more active in the reference site than at the restored site, and that they're completely different, which is pretty cool. That means there's different communities and different activity levels. And then also taking the top 4 from each site of those most active, I found that the 4 most active in the reference site are also present at the restored site, just not the most active there. And 3 of the top 4 most active at the restored site are unique to that site, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of like introduced soils, dumped a bunch of soil on top of it to raise the elevation, so that introduced a whole new community. So you can see there's more unique, I guess ASVs, you could think of it as species to that site than at the reference site. Another way to look at microbial communities is using microscopy. So I can look at autofluorescence of chloroplasts, which are autotrophs, which are in green, and heterotrophs, which eat organic matter. And basically we did some studies to look at the relationship between heterotrophs and autotrophs, and they had different reactions to taking autotrophy out of the picture by doing a dark incubation, which shows that they have different relationships between these heterotrophs and their autotrophs, which is pretty cool, especially since there's so few autotrophs in the restored site. And finally, I was looking at gene presence of different metabolisms involved in methane fluxes in the slough. So sulfate-reducing bacteria are abundant because there's abundant sulfate in ocean water. And they are also anaerobic, and they compete with methanogens for hydrogen and substrates. So if you have a whole bunch of SRBs, you're kind of mitigating methane release by stopping methanogens from generating methane. And this is a lot of information. Generally speaking, preliminary look, they generally follow trends observed in the pore water of sulfate depletion and hydrogen sulfide production, which is reaffirming that these are accurate. The large error bars are because they're averages between environmental replicates, but these are generally the profile patterns that you see across all replicate cores. So yeah, highly abundant SRBs that follow expected trends. Methanogens are also fairly abundant, less abundant than in freshwater wetlands, also follow expected trends. And then methanotrophs are the last thing, not very abundant. Most of the methane release is mitigated by SRBs. Yeah, that's it.
Hello, my name is Chase Davenport. I'm a master's student in coastal science and policy, and I'm also the founder of the Ocean Beach Institute, which is a coastal science and education organization devoted to conserving disappearing beaches. And in San Francisco, we have a disappearing beach. 1 minute history lesson. 10,000 years ago, we had more than 26 miles of dunes west of San Francisco. In the 1850s, after glaciers melted, sea levels rose, about a third of the city was dunes. And then we started developing the city from east to west. And now we have, as you see, tiny little slivers of dunes left on the west side of San Francisco. And that matters because those dunes are what are protecting a community and critical infrastructure from 30, 40, 50-foot waves in the winter. And we have done a lot of development in San Francisco. You can see on the right, the south end of Ocean Beach, where that red wiggly line is, we not only developed on the shoreline, we pushed the shoreline about 220 feet west in the early 1900s. And we've found that the ocean is trying to go back to where it was before. And so we're tracking these disappearing beaches. And we want to know in the long term, how fast is the beach disappearing and where? And we want to know also, in the shorter term, these interventions that we're doing, like giant dune restoration projects and a seawall covered with about 3/4 of a mile of sand. What impact is this having? Is this making the dunes shrink? Is this making the dunes grow? What's happening? And perhaps most importantly, when I went to these organizations and agencies working on this, and I spent about $200 in coffees with the different people of these agencies, and I basically said, hey, let's do some predictive modeling, and they all said, we don't want it. Like, we've done predictive modeling for decades on this. We got burned by that predictive modeling project. Before we do any more predictive modeling, we want to know what has happened in the last 10 years. And so structure for motion is a good tool for measuring that. Basically, we use aerial photos on different dates, and we build a 3D model of a dune system or a landscape. And then we take a landscape from a different date, we stack it on top of that landscape, and we basically say, we subtract one from the other, and we say, how much has the beach changed? And what we have found at Ocean Beach, this is Ocean Beach, the red means we're losing dunes. This is just over 10 years. These are really intuitive visualizations, but basically anywhere where the dark red is means we've lost more than 4 meters of elevation. And behind, especially at the south end, not the dark red tall cliffs, but just north of there, there's some critical sewage infrastructure that is perched right on top of that erosion hotspot. And in general, the south end of the beach is the big problem. And what we're trying to figure out is, when are these big erosion events happening? Is it individual storms? Is it people trampling through the dunes? What's going on? And what we're learning is actually pretty surprising so far. We're looking at these big storms, these kind of extreme wave events, and we're not seeing the erosion in the South Dunes that we would expect. That big gray dune in the middle, we were expecting big red blowouts there, and we're just not seeing it. So the mystery is kind of continuing. If it's not extreme wave events that's causing the erosion of these dunes, what is causing this chronic wave pattern, this chronic erosion pattern? And so, thanks to John Warwick in particular at USGS, who has taught me pretty much everything I know about structure for motion, we're developing a custom monitoring program for Ocean Beach so that we can learn over time, basically, what is working. Like, as we build this seawall, is the beach disappearing in front of it? As we spend $50 million on dune restoration, is the beach, is the dune growing? And over time, what we've learned is, since we've been showing people these images of the beach and the dunes changing, the appetite for predictive modeling has actually grown again. And I now have a very small contract with the city of San Francisco to take these images and do a predictive modeling study to see kind of what is the future of Ocean Beach. Thank you.
All right, great. So a big round of applause for our first group of speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I'm here representing quite a large group, and I'll call out Manny Rojas and Ethan Yen and Will Chapman, who are here as part of this group, working on this project on recharge net metering to improve groundwater resources under climate change. Within California, groundwater systems are under severe threat. And there's really 3 main causes. Demand is increasing, as you might imagine. But the other 2 are not as well understood, and that's changes in land use and the increasing intensity of rainfall. Both of those result in less recharge, which is water going into the ground. And at 127 medium and high priority basins across California, plans are being developed and implemented in order to improve groundwater resilience in the face of current and ongoing climate change. So this project is in support of a program called Recharge Net Metering. I'll tell you about it briefly. And it really has 3 main goals: to expand the program in the Pajaro Valley, extend it to other areas, and then help it to be sustained for the long term. The net metering program is based around this concept of collection of excess stormwater, which falls on the ground surface at times when local rivers and streams are at or above capacity. So there's an excess of water on the landscape, but relatively few opportunities to get that excess water into the ground. Managed recharge operates at many different scales, from low impact development up to huge spreading grounds. These projects operate at an intermediate scale with a goal of getting around 100 to 1,000 acre feet a year into the ground. An acre foot is just an acre of land a foot deep. Think of it like a big pizza box of water. And to put it in perspective, it's enough water for 2 families in a year. The general concept, if you're a grower and you're withdrawing a certain amount of water to grow delicious berries, but you have drainage from a relatively large area, the larger the area that your property drains, the more water you can collect and get in, to the point where you can end up with negative net pumping if you can get enough water collected and put into the ground. So this program is something that we spun up in collaboration with the Resource Conservation District of Santa Cruz County and have been operating on kind of an ad hoc basis, project by project, for some years. The goal of this CCCR project is to stand up this program so it can be sustained and operate in perpetuity. And it's fun that we've been doing this for a while because now we have a few years of data, and I've got one data plot to show that I think is kind of interesting. This is annual rainfall over a 13-year period, and then this is the amount of runoff that was collected. In this particular project, the goal is 100 acre feet per year or more of water put into the ground. Wide range of conditions. When we started, it was a drought. Things didn't look so great. But if you average this out, we're hitting the goal on average. What's also interesting here is some years are at the low end of this range, and there's like another data set at the high end. And this shows that increase in variability that we're seeing as a consequence of climate change, with many more years resulting in more rain falling in a small number of increasingly intense storms. That's why we need these projects. At the start of this grant, we were able to put together with partners at UC Berkeley a cost-benefit analysis that showed that net metering is the cheapest water you can get other than not pumping. And so that's been the basis for operating the program with Pajaro Valley Water, that we help to develop the projects, monitor the benefit, and they issue a rebate for a fraction of the cost of pumping water. So those who participate actually get to run their meter backwards effectively in response to putting that water into the ground. And the final part of the project is to develop this business plan. We've been doing this with Nature for Water, which is a fixture of the Nature Conservancy. And we've put together this plan and now have been shopping it around. The general idea is to raise about $3 million, and mainly it's for staff who can operate as a program instead of operating on an ad hoc basis, project by project, which is what we've been doing for about 10 years. And in fact, after developing the business plan and then a variety of elements that we can share, from one-page documents to PowerPoint presentations to a 60-slide explanation to an interactive workbook that lets you adjust budgets, we've raised about $1.5 million so far. So we're about halfway to that long-term goal. The idea of that goal is then to allow the program to staff up under the Resource Conservation District and then build the rest of the programmatic elements that will allow it to keep operating, as well as make modifications to the funding mechanism for the rebates so that some of that cash flow can flow through the program and help to keep it operating. We are in discussion with additional basins and partners outside of Pajaro Valley, so we're pretty confident we're going to be able to push that out. With that, again, I want to acknowledge funding from a lot of sources. That's just a few of them over the last 10 years. But really what this grant has done through CCCR is to help us to create a real program out of this, and that's going to allow it to continue for the long term. So thank you.
Jonathan. All right.
I am here, yeah. Hey, everybody, I'm Jonathan Hicken. I don't need that. I'm the executive director of the Seymour Marine Discovery Center. That is where you are sitting right now. Welcome. We are developing this amazing new exhibit experience with support from Center for Coastal Climate Resilience. But first, let me orient you. So the 3 core values that drive our work at Seymour Center are science, solutions, and Santa Cruz, right? So we get our community, primarily families and families with children, really excited about science itself and the work that you guys do every day. Help them see how the impacts of climate change are showing up in their own lives and in their own communities. To connect that science and those impacts to real solutions that exist right here in our own community that many of you are working on. And finally, leave all of these people with meaningful and concrete ways that they can get involved in advancing those solutions. So that is what drives our work. And one of the problems is, I know so many of you, I mean, there are 30 some odd presentations, you are all working on the science and working on these solutions. And we want to make it really easy, fast, inexpensive, and impactful for you to share your work right here at Seymour Center in a way that we've never been able to do before. So introducing Seymour HQ. Now this is an early design. We are in the middle of the design process. There are no graphics or colorations or the artistic side of the exhibit added yet. And the actual layout will probably shift a little bit too. But this gives you the idea. It is going to be a multi-station, largely digital, interactive space. And we've designed it to be hyper flexible, meaning as you all are creating different digital assets, make them narrative videos or live feeds or visualizations of any kind, we are building a platform where all you have to do is send me that content, send me that link, send me that feed, send me that visualization, and it's going to end up in Seymour HQ in a flash. We are seeing the opportunity for different interactive elements, like interactive maps. Many of you have these available already, and the community's just not seeing them or playing with them. So we're going to make that possible and make that easy and fast and inexpensive. We are currently working with Dr. Carolyn Casey of the Institute of Marine Sciences on an interactive game about ocean sounds and how it impacts the way pinnipeds and other animals are communicating with each other and responding to things like large shipping vessels. There's going to be a number of there's also going to be a vertical interactive screen. The reason I bring this up is to say that maybe you have vertical assets, maybe you have landscape assets, it doesn't matter. We're going to be able to get it in an HQ. We're going to be able to do that quickly and inexpensively, easily. And another element we're really excited about is an audio space. So this is going to be a somewhat secluded space. Some of the comps here are more open. What we're building is really more of an enclosed, singular, almost more reflective space where you as the visitor are going to be able to choose different audio experiences. Maybe it's an artistic musical representation of your data, or maybe it's live feed from Monterey Bay. What whales are singing at that moment. Maybe it's interviews with scientists or community members, but it's a dedicated audio space. Finally, it's not going to look like this, but this gives you the idea. We're building into it something called our scientist snapshots. In this example at a different museum, these are rotating little panels that introduce a person behind the work and a little bit about them. We're going to do the same for all of you and for all of our community members. So there'll be 9 snapshots at any given time rotating through where we're going to be able to introduce you as individuals, as human beings to our community and bring a face to the science that is impacting tens of thousands of people right here in our community. I wanted to illustrate where in the design process we are, just so you know. We're working through a couple of different potential layouts. This happens to be the one I like best, but we are working through it right now. And it'll probably adorn with sort of biophilic and natural elements to bring a little bit more warmth, and even a little place-based, imagine a CNC carved map of the topography and bathymetry of Monterey Bay for people to get oriented. So these are a couple of inspirational examples we're working with. And the last thing I want to bring up, I have 5 seconds, is we are building a professional podcast studio, video podcast studio, so we can also be interviewing you live. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Jennifer? And then Saul, you're up next.
Hi, I may not be as animated, but thanks, Jonathan, that was great. I have been running the Climate Action Lab, which has had several different kinds of projects, but I'm going to focus on one in particular, which has been fog harvesting or water harvesting from fog. My partner is sick today. Anya's not able to be here, but I've also been working with Peter Weiss. Last year, I shared this idea with y'all. I'm in art faculty, I should say. I should say that first. I teach sculpture. And I also run Open Lab, which is an art and science collaborative research center. And so if you weren't here last year, I'm showing you these few images of looking at fog harvesting and the actual, thank you, the actual like physical structures of what fog nets look like, right? And we see them from around the world, from Morocco to northern Chile, places where it's really arid in the summer, but there's a lot of fog. Fog drifts through these nets, and the little particles attach to the net and eventually collect to create a drop, and you can collect the water that way. We are doing this at UC Santa Cruz. You probably already know. If you haven't met Peter, he's a really great guy. Just got a big grant as well to look at the chemistry of fog. He started doing fog harvesting at the farm because he was looking at the chemistry of the soil, and there was a lot of mercury, and it was like, why is there all this mercury? And Peter was like, well, maybe it's in the fog, and that was where this sort of fog harvesting started for him. There are other people on campus that are doing this as well. And I started thinking about that as well, and how could you think about it through a kind of collective lens that also brought the community into wanting to understand what is fog harvesting, but also what does it mean to think about fog nets as kind of sculptures, and how could we sort of build these sculptures that would also create stories, that would also give you an opportunity to make something that people would gather around and say, oh, I never thought about the fog. This is so cool. And it also functions as a collector. So we started designing different ones. Anya built the one that's out in front. If you haven't seen it, it's the shape of a cloud. We're currently working on another one. We did our own little art and fog exhibition at the Seymour Center, which was up all summer. We created a fog tank and a mister with undergraduates who also designed this little miniature fog net. And we had like misters that you might imagine when you go get massaged. We created this little thing so you could push the button and you could get some fog out of that. So here's the cloud sculpture there. Also just thinking about it for the more than human, like what are the animals that are migrating through our systems, the pollinators that are gonna need water, the plants. Can we also create these like micro fog stations around for them to be able to collect water as they move through the system? Sonifying the fog, an undergraduate worked with us over the summer, created a beautiful sonification that allowed you to sort of hear the fog through the day. As we all know, there are these moments where it's really foggy and then it gets clear and then it's really foggy, right? So being able to hear that through time and looking at the data was also been really interesting. We had this new project with TikTok. Of course, I'm working with undergrads who know how to do this stuff, where it's seeing the fog and taking pictures. So it's called Fog Watchers. If everybody takes a picture, then we might be able to create another kind of data set through a visualization. So these are some pictures that are coming in through the general public. We started thinking again about the more than human species and what would it mean if we started to see those as part of our ecosystem. So we went to the Norris Center and 3D scanned a lot of the animals that are in the collection there and spent the summer animating them. And then, let's see if it'll work. It's not working. Well, these are supposed to be videos, right? And so I actually brought them. And now, let's see if the next one will work. Oh, there we go. And so we animated the 3D models, and we're using what's called Artivive, which is not like the best way to look at VR images, but it's super fun. I brought stickers. You can have your own. Let's see if this one goes. But the idea here too is to have this little piece of fog with you and think about the animals that are part of this ecosystem beyond just extracting water, but also how do we care for and be part of the communities as we learn who these communities are. This one's really cute. And then being able to hold them in your hands. And so having this idea of having a relationship with the fog and with the little critters that live in our world. Anyway, thank you.
Saul, and then Erica, you're up next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saul. I'm the artist in residence here for CCCR and also IMS. And I'm here to present a look into the virtual world that I've been designing with various labs on campus here and at EMS. A little bit about my process and medium that I use in order to create those archives to storytell and create a new archive. A little bit about my process is really thinking about constructing this digital archive, which I call the virtual space, but really thinking about how is it that I'm going to create those archives. I really was basing my work in optics and using these wide angle mid shots, macro shots, and also these scans to start thinking about what is our limitations to our field of vision, but also the visual spectrum, really thinking about what we can see and what we can't see. And so this is a sort of example of some of the explorations that I'm doing with some of the work where I'm scanning some of these environments to get some spatial depth through Gaussian splats. 2D photographs where I experiment on doing horizontal or panoramic imagery, vertoramas as well. Video where I'm actually going out into the field and recording so I can get some audio and some feedback from people that I've been interviewing to get some information about their process. And also these 360 photos and 3D scans of the environment using photogrammetry. A little bit about my editing process is really central to my work, where I really take care of the archive itself, where I'm making sure that the photo is very clear and that the lighting situation is nice for the next person to actually use. So I pay attention to the archive itself as a photograph. Another thing that I want to jump to is the art and science collaboration. So two themes have emerged with this archive that I've been building is really thinking about the CCCR virtual space with the research that I've been getting from the labs themselves, and then really the reflections that I've been having as this artistic process has developed through this art exhibition that I'm also developing. The proof of concept that I designed initially was really thinking about a virtual space that you can enter and then be able to kind of navigate these three core values that CCCR is investigating, and really having a space for you to go into each of those labs to kind of explore what those labs are really doing the research on, focused on those key focus areas. This is an example of when you enter the lab itself. Or the virtual space, you can kind of roam around and then find the lab that you want to sort of navigate to, and each lab has their own sort of dioramic space, so you can kind of move around this spatial orientation to kind of have this exhibition style virtually. But also what I've been doing with this reflection with some of these labs is actually going and capturing the behind the scenes of what's going on in the lab. So I've been visiting like Misha's lab and getting a little bit of insight into what they would like for their virtual space to look like. So these labs are also designed with people and the researchers in mind to kind of help explore and kind of represent their vision. So I do have a video here that I'm gonna skip only because I see the time, but there is a video that has a representation of one of the Gaussian splats. I also have some video profiles from Adina's lab where I'm really interviewing and asking questions about their processes. So this is another example of the lab, some 360 photos. But really quickly, going into artistic representations, I'm really interested in like seeing the environment observations as an artist as well, to kind of have these conversations with the scientists. And so I've been also taking photographs, changing the style and the way that we see them so that we can see them through different filters. These are some really nice wide angle representations of some vertoramas where you can see achromatic and also in color. Infrared photography aesthetics, And then finally, where is this going? I hope to sort of create a virtual exhibition that's an extension to the website, but also a place where we can do some exhibitions. And if you're interested in collaborating, scan that QR code and you can talk to me. Yeah.
Erica, and I just want to say one of the things that we asked Saul to take on as part of these challenges was how we were going to figure out ways for people to actually see all the many different kinds of projects that you're doing. So that's the challenge that he's had to take on. Erica?
Hey, so I just advance the slides? Yeah. Okay, great. Good afternoon. I'm here to talk about our partnership with CCCR. So I'm the director of the Science Communication Program. We're a graduate master's program that trains 10 students per year in science communication. And our partnership with CCCR has had these main goals. Mostly, we are here to try to communicate about the results of all of the research that you're doing funded through CCCR. In the process, we're training my students to be able to communicate climate science, and we're trying to, broaden the discussion about nature-based solutions and climate solutions with the goal of connecting your research to people who need to accept these solutions and implement them. Our partnership outcomes to date, so we've trained 6 fellows. 2 of them are currently in the program this year, and they are right there. Do you guys want to wave? This is Claudia and Cassidy. Before them, we trained 4 fellows who are all working out in the world, so that's a fantastic outcome. The 4 fellows that came through the program previously published 66 stories and pieces of content, and these are in professional publications. So because the program places our students as interns with professional publications, and because we also mentor our students to publish professionally their work from their classes, they have a huge professional publication reach. So these are publications that are published in local, regional, national, and international outlets. Finally, we proposed creating a summit, a climate communications summit, communicating climate solutions summit. And we did hold that this September, last month, right here in the same room, and some of y'all were there. It was a huge success. I think we were happily surprised by how many people wanted to be a part of the summit. We sold out our attendance to the summit. So one of the things we're thinking about now is where do we go from there? These are the 6 fellows that were trained and are currently being trained, and you can see their outcomes. I think the strength of their outcomes, and these are strong outcomes even for students in our program, and I think part of the reason why these particular fellows get those outcomes are, first of all, they're trained in communicating climate solutions, which is extremely in demand in all, the communication world. And also the fellowship funds a dedicated mentor for these students. So they have, in addition to my mentoring, they have Kim Hickok, who's a program alum who works with them step by step to make sure that they understand the science and the storytelling, so they do really well. These are some sample stories among those 66 that have already been published, and you can see that they cover a wide range of topics. A lot of them cover your research and research of partner organizations. So that story on flood insurance in a little city in the Delta called Isleton, that was published by Anna Fitzgerald Guth, and her fellowship was partially funded by, what's the name of that organization? Ocean Science Trust. And so they were really interested in communicating about different insurance solutions that are being tested to deal with climate disasters. So that story was published on KQED, it was on the radio, and it was on their website. That's one example. I think I won't cover all the rest of them in detail just because of time, but you can see that, this Elkhorn Slough story, that's about Adina Payton's research, and et cetera. So these are some of the kinds of outcomes stories that we've published.
I have a teeny tiny data point, which I'm really excited about because I usually get to have data. But this is just to show that people really felt strongly about the Communicating Climate Solutions Symposium, and they took away a lot of important and helpful things from it, which is part of what we're thinking about next. These are some of the ideas that we have that we'll be talking about with all of y'all in the room. And I think that's my time. Thank you.
Hi, I'm James Curtis. I'm going to be presenting Tank to Table on behalf of my PI, Alexi Luthot, who couldn't be here. Tank to Table is researching integrated rainwater harvesting systems as a source for urban garden irrigation and environmental art. So there are three major components to the Tank to Table program. We're designing and installing rainwater harvesting systems. You can see this photo on the right. It was taken from the rain tank outside of the Seymour Center. And we are also using rain tanks as a platform for art and connection to the space, on top of researching different irrigation tools and comparing irrigation management techniques. So building the rainwater harvesting systems is a major focus of the Tank to Table program. Through the IDEAS Sustainability Program minor, we're working with students to install rainwater harvesting systems. So here are some photos of us installing these rainwater harvesting systems, which include a 500-gallon rain tank, a leaf catcher, an overflow, and a first flush diverter, just to make everything safe and approved. And included in the rainwater harvesting system is a gravity-fed drip irrigation system. So all this locally harvested rainwater is being fed to our garden beds without any pumping and is carrying us through the dry summer months. So as again, this is the tank that we installed at the Seymour Center just out front. On top of this, we are using our rain tanks as an opportunity to showcase art. In collaboration with Seed Spoon Science and Alberto M. Vasquez, who is in the MFA Arts program, they were able to install a mural on each of our rain tanks installed, which is a beautiful thing and shows that these tanks are not just, don't have to just be gray or black empty cylinders. They can be part of the space. So here's an example of the before and after, and you can really see that there is a difference here. And then the research that's going on is still ongoing. We are researching 4 different methods for managing irrigation. This is to bridge the tank, the rain tank and rainwater harvesting to sustainable irrigation practices. So we're looking at 2 soil sensor-based irrigation methods and 2 climate-based irrigation methods. The climate-based irrigation methods include using evapotranspiration data from CIMMYS weather stations, and using Crop Manage, which is a web-based application developed by UCANR to also use evapotranspiration data to determine how much to irrigate your crops. And the soil sensors that we are researching include soil moisture sensors, which can tell you the volumetric water content of a soil, and tensiometers, which can tell you the amount of tension in a soil, which is a different metric for measuring soil moisture. So this research is still ongoing, and there's been a lot of things to keep track of with the soil moisture sensors and the climate data. But last summer, you can see that we grew a lot of lettuce. We were able to use 261 gallons using the CIMMYS evapotranspiration method to grow on an 8 by 4 foot bed, 112 lettuces, and we were able to do that 3 times between the summer months of April and September. This means that with our 500-gallon rain tank, we could have grown 672 heads of lettuce, all with gravity-fed irrigation systems, and no pumping would be needed, and this would be completely locally harvested rainwater and would really boost climate resilience. We even had a moment where the water was turned off for a few weeks in our garden, and we only had our rain tank to water our garden, and if we hadn't installed that, we would have been unable to water our lettuce. This was also right after a transplant of the lettuce, so they were just little baby lettuces, and this just goes to show that rainwater harvesting is a really tangible and easy and accessible way for boosting climate resilience. Thank you. And we have a website.
Hi, Christy. And then Ann next. And Pam asked me to remind folks that there is a QR code, so there was a QR code here, with the agenda in the back.
Hi all, my name is Christy Croker. I'm right in the middle of that list of many, many PIs. So I'm going to be talking about a very large interdisciplinary collaborative project. The 4 names that are in bold, those are the individuals, those are the postdocs and grad students that really led the work that I'm going to be talking about. And our goal here was really to promote the resilience of the Dungeness crab fishery to climate-induced harmful algal blooms. And I'll just start with why we were doing this. So harmful algal blooms are caused by a diatom, normally a Pseudonychia species that I'm showing you here, that can produce domoic acid. That domoic acid doesn't actually hurt the invertebrates or the fish that it starts to get into the food chain through, but when it comes up to marine mammals or birds, it can have really profound effects, and it can profoundly affect humans that eat the invertebrates or fish. So after we had a really large marine heat wave that had low dissolved oxygen conditions, we had some anomalous harmful algal blooms that people weren't expecting. So here I'm showing you the coast, the west coast of the US, right up at the top. You'll see Washington, and you can see kind of in Northern California, during the marine heat wave here, we had this big bloom of harmful algae that shut down our Dungeness crab fishery for quite a long time and had some really profound effects. And this is one of the most important fisheries in the state of California. So we decided to bring together a group of scientists who are working on different aspects of this to see how we could help inform fishing and management. So we're working with both fishers and managers on this project. We took a 3-pronged approach. So we took a bunch of folks who have a lot of expertise in harmful algal blooms, oceanography, modeling, to help us actually see if we could forecast harmful algal bloom events. Then there were the biologists and ecologists that worked on, can we actually predict where Dungeness crabs are going to be during these harmful algal bloom events? How is the crab physiology changing in these warmer conditions so that we can actually make some predictions about how the domoic acid moves through the food chain. Okay, so I have really high-level results here. So our PETA actually led this work, and so these are some of our results showing the long-term changes in HAB frequency from 1995 to 2020. So we started with the data that we already had and see if we could actually come up with a predictive model. We do a pretty good job. And so here I'm showing you warmer colors represent increasing harmful algal bloom frequency. Blue colors means we have less of them. So from 1995 to 2020, you can see that in winter, in spring especially, so these are times when the fishery is really happening, we see more harmful algal blooms happening in that northern part of California. We also took all of the trawl survey data that we could for Dungeness crabs and created a predictive model for Dungeness crabs across the US West Coast. And this was led by Dr. Mark Morales, a postdoc in Malin Pinsky's lab. Here I'm showing you again, there's a huge body of work behind each of these. I'm showing you the density of Dungeness crabs from his model from 2001 to 2010. 2011 and 19, you can see there's not too much change. As we move forward with climate change, we're seeing decreases in the northern parts of the range and the crabs shifting northward. Okay, last, I'm going to talk about Erica Ferrer was a postdoc in my lab who did a series of experiments out here to look at how the crabs uptake and depurate domoic acid under different climate conditions. And she found that temperature didn't have a really big effect, but low oxygen associated with these marine heat waves can actually cause crabs to uptake more domoic acid and hold on to it for longer. Through all of this, we've been working with the fishing community, the Dungeness fishing community, and managers to try to understand how they could use this information. So right now, Emma Chiaroni and Carrie Pomeroy are at the Dungeness Task Force meeting, talking to them about how we put these pieces together in a way that is most useful for them, like how they might use the information 10 years out, 20 years out, and how that can inform the management of the fishery. That's it.
Anne, and then Mona.
Hi, my name is Anne. I am a PhD candidate in the Ocean Sciences Department. Here at UCSC, I'm going to talk about Chinook salmon in the Klamath River and how it pertains to food security for tribal members. And this work was a collaboration with the Yurok tribe. So Chinook salmon have been getting smaller over the decades, and that includes in the Klamath Basin, which is in Northern California and Southern Oregon. And there's some consequences to that. So the smaller body size of these fish means that the females are producing fewer eggs, and it means that a given fish is producing less meals for the people who are reliant on these fish, so less food security. So the two figures on the right, anything that below the red line indicates a decrease over time. So there's two main mechanisms that could be causing the fish to become smaller. It could either be changes in size at age. So the fish could have a decrease in their average size for a given age. So like in the example here of 3-year-olds getting smaller. Or it could be a shift in age composition where something happens like you lose the oldest individuals, but then the average size of the fish in the population decreases. So in the Klamath Basin, we have historical records that we get to compare to our contemporary data. And these historical records were taken by Dr. John Otterbein Snyder. And in 1919 through 1930, he collected length measurements and also age estimates from fish scales. So we compared that to our contemporary data from the Trinity River hatchery. Trinity River is a major tributary to the Klamath. The green is the historical data, and the blue is contemporary. And we can see that there has been no significant change in size at age over the past 100 years. However, when we looked at the age composition, we do see a pretty dramatic shift. So at the top in the green is, again, the historical data, where we see the modal age is 4, and that has shifted to our contemporary data to a modal age of 3 in the blue. And in the contemporary data, we have basically lost the oldest individuals, the 5-year-olds and the 6-year-olds. So it looks like the fish in the Klamath River have been getting smaller from a shift in age composition. And so there's 3 possibilities of what's driving that. It could be selection from fisheries, selection from hatchery practices, and possibly selection on migration ecotypes. So there's 2 major migration ecotypes in the Klamath Basin. They're commonly referred to as spring run and fall run. And it refers to when the fish first migrate as adults back into fresh water before spawning. So the spring run, or the early migrators, they've been basically lost from the Klamath Basin from habitat loss. However, we still have a population of these early run fish in the Trinity River, partially thanks to the hatchery program. And so we can look, which I said is where our data came from. So we can now use a genetic marker that my lab discovered to figure out if a fish was an early run or late run individual. There's one genomic region that controls this behavior, and we refer to it as the Rosa region. And if you're homozygous for the early variant in the yellow, your entry time, you do not overlap in entry times with the individuals who are homozygous for the late variant in the blue. So it has a separation of the 2 phenotypes, and is a great marker for us to easily identify these ecotypes. And in our contemporary data, we were able to look at data from the Trinity River hatchery in 2010 and 2011. to look at their ecotypes and their age composition, and we found that the early migrating Chinook salmon at the top in the green had an older age composition than the late migrating individuals. So you can see a shift from modal age of 4 to 3. So this is suggesting that the loss of the early run the early migrating fish from the Klamath Basin might be playing a role in that age shift that we are seeing that is causing the fish to become smaller. So Chinook salmon have been getting smaller. It's likely due to an age shift. There's been a major loss of the early migrating Chinook salmon from this basin, and there's a variation between the ecotypes of their age composition. So loss of early migrating fish is likely playing a role in that shift in age composition. That's all.
Hi everyone, my name is Mona. I'm a PhD student from the CSC department working with Professor Alex Pang. And today I'm here to give some updates on our projects supported by CCCR that focuses on using machine learning and coastal webcams to detect shorelines changes in real time. So currently we're on the stage to explore different ways to turn these model outputs into useful coastal observations. Things like shoreline variability, beach change, and flood impacts. And we're especially interested in how these automatically detected shorelines can relate to physical drivers like floods and waves, and how this approach can complement the traditional monitoring methods such as LiDAR surveys and tide gauges, which are very accurate but sometimes sparse or expensive. So to give a little background on the ML model we're using, we built on SAM2. It is a vision model designed by Meta. It takes videos as input, and on top of that, we fine-tuned it from using the shoreline imagery from multiple sites so that it could reliably identify shoreline under different conditions. And in short, the model processes the webcam videos in frames by frame and extract the shoreline, giving us thousands of detections per day with no manual input. And therefore, with all of these data, we started to explore how this result can correlate with seastate data, coastal data. For example, whether shoreline variabilities can reflect the offshore wave energy. And today I'll focus on one specific application we have, which is to reconstruct the beach topology itself. So the study site that we chose for this experiment is Santa Cruz. We have a camera mounted on top of the Walton Lighthouse overlooking the shoreline, giving us a continuous look of the shoreline. And near that, there's also a NOAA tide gauge that we use as reference that provides the tide level information every 6 seconds, which is really perfect for this type of analysis. And the day we chose is November 11, 2024, which has a king tide event that covers a big range of the intertidal zone because of the large range of the tide. And the idea here, it's simple. We basically, each detected shoreline corresponds to a specific tide level, and which means each curve gives us a horizontal position of the waterline paired with a known vertical elevation. And with that, we can therefore reconstruct the beach topology, which is in the 3D shape of the intertidal beach surface. And here's the whole process that comes together. First we extract the shoreline from the webcam using the ML model, and then we rectify each detection using ground control points so that every pixel corresponds to the real world coordinates. And then for each time window, we then summarize the detections using a curved box plot all the way to the red over there, and then that captures the median shoreline and its variability. And then we match each median shoreline to its tide head using the NOAA tide gauge information, then triangulate across the time to reconstruct the intertidal surface. And this is the result of the reconstructed digital surface that pretty much can update as often as you want based on the data you have. And of course, we know that this approach focuses only on the intertidal zone, is not the full beach, and traditional methods like LiDAR or drone photogrammetry can capture the entire profile in high resolution, but they're usually done only every few months and require significant field effort. And next step, we're working on a few directions as we're continuing exploring different applications to validate our reconstruction with GPS and LiDAR data, to quantify uncertainty from camera calibration and rectification, and then to extend this approach to detect wave run-ups, overtopping, and flood events in real time. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Javier Gonzalez Rocha. I'm Assistant Professor in the Applied Mathematics Department, and I'm here to share with you the work that we've been doing developing an intelligent 3D air monitoring network to pinpoint the impacts of wildfire risk. So overall, my group is very much interested in thinking about engineering solutions that can contribute towards addressing big climate problems. Today we'll talk about wildfire. So the project that we have has been impacted by the CCU wildfire event. So here I'm showing you the graph of the air quality impact that was experienced. And this was based on an air monitor that was based in Santa Cruz. And as you can see, the fire began in August and the impacts were quite high all the way down to October. It was only after October that things tapered off and we were then within the 24-hour federal standards. And so the question is, what was the impact to farm workers during all this time and what systems are in place to help them? Here is a picture of the Cal Enviro screen that is showing the baseline pollution. And so one of the things by looking at this data that we have found is that a lot of the burden is in the southern part of the county where there's lots of agricultural activity. And when you look at the factors that are contributing to pollution, we have diesel, particulate matter, traffic, pesticides is a big one. There's also issues with drinking water and lead from housing. I usually show this picture, and I said, based on this picture, you know, if you were to place air quality sensors, where would you place them? So I'll just jump ahead, and I'll show you what the current infrastructure looks like, right? So we can see big gaps. So in the middle, this is the regulatory monitors that are operated by state agencies. And on the right are the purple air monitors, which are monitors that folks can buy, right? So you can see that there's a persistent gap and agricultural communities are left out. So the goal of this project is to extend the purple air monitor network to understand, one, what are the pollution gradients in the southern part of the county? And then also what is, with that data, better understand the fate of pollution. So here you can see a picture of farm workers. This is down in Bakersfield, but it's a nice illustration. You can see the pollution layer hanging above, and we want to understand what is the fate of pollution. So we've been working with community, and we've been developing drone technology to go up and sample the atmosphere. So this is the before and after. So this is before the project, and this is after the project. So now we've extended down to as far as Castroville, and we're continuing to develop the network. Now, here's some of the data. I'll slow down because I think this is really important to look at. So in the data, I'm showing VOC, so it's a pollutant. And this is for the months of August, September, and some data for October. And at the bottom, you have temperature, right? And so what do we see? We see that the concentrations increase right after sunset, and they persist elevated until the sunrise, right? And now I highlight this as important because as heat increases, one of our solutions to removing farm workers from exposure is to have them start working earlier. So what the data is showing is that we're taking them from one risk and we're placing them at risk of another. The other thing, if you look at the sort of the parabola, this dip in data, what happens after we get into October, into winter time when it's cooler. Well, you see that you have higher concentrations throughout the day. And so I didn't have the data here, but I was sharing with some of you, we had a prescribed fire, and we saw that actually the impacts of the prescribed fire, at least were observed out in the county based on the data that we're collecting the following morning. We're continuing to collect data, and we're now really focused on sort of advancing the work that we're doing with drones. I'm not showing you this. This is not particulate matter, but it's another gas that we have the capability to measure, and this is methane. And we've been doing evening operations to sort of try and understand what is the impact of the planetary boundary layer coming down. And you can see that we can actually capture these layers of pollution come down. So far, we've had great success expanding the monitoring network in the Pajaro Valley. We've had great success partnering with communities, and now we're working with school districts. So we're working on an MOU with Pajaro Valley Unified School District and then North Monterey County. And so we hope that we can continue developing these partnerships and then start working with the VisLab team to see how we can better visualize some of the data that we're collecting. And with that, thank you so much for your time.
Hi everyone, I'm Sam. I'm a postdoc with the Center and EEB, and I work with Eric Pakovacs and Steve Munch. So I don't think I need to convince anyone in the room that the world is hot and the world is hungry, right? So in warming and harvesting of food resources are both affecting fisheries, not only in California, but the rest of the world. Now, warming and harvesting both affect the body sizes of fish species specifically. So on one hand, warming alters the energetic efficiencies of eggs, larvae, and juveniles so that maturation is accelerated and they achieve a smaller body size overall compared to in cooler conditions. And then another process affecting body sizes is selective harvesting. So selective harvesting removes the largest individuals from populations such that over time, individuals mature earlier and they achieve a smaller body size overall. So along with body size changes, a number of population attributes are also changing. So these things are like density and reproduction. And there's some evidence that larger animals produce more stable populations than smaller animals. And importantly, for managers to improve the stability and resilience of these harvested stocks, it's critical that they know which processes are leading to smaller body sizes. So for example, harvest closures may reverse the size declines caused by selective harvesting, but not those caused by warming. So my work with the CCCR aims to disentangle the processes driving body size changes in fishery species to predict when and why population size structures can recover. To this end, there's a bunch of different statistical methods for trying to understand complex systems like fisheries. And so before starting on my main project goals, I really wanted to assess a number of those methods and their ability to detect interactions between variables in complex systems. So autoregressive modeling is probably the most popular method. Importantly, AR modeling makes the assumption that dynamics are stable and the interactions between variables are linear. However, the world is often nonlinear. And so empirical dynamic modeling is a suite of tools that are useful for understanding relationships between variables when data are nonlinear, and convergent cross-mapping is one of the most popular of these tools. So essentially with CCM, we can reconstruct a state space attractor using time-delayed coordinates. And if two variables influence each other, then the blue nearest neighbor on the y variables attractor, for example, will correspond temporally to the nearest neighbor on the x variable attractor. And another emerging EDM method is the Gaussian process. Here we first construct a current state vector of all variables at time t to predict the future state at time t+1. Then for each of the variables, we can fit a Gaussian process and we can approximate the function describing the data and ultimately determine whether the variables influence each other. And we specifically compared these methods on simulated systems with different levels of dimensionality or number of variables, as well as nonlinearity and additive observation noise that occurs in complex systems. The simplest and most linear case we simulated was a 3-variable Lockwood-Terra model, which is characterized by a linear functional response between variables. And the highest dimensional and most nonlinear system was a 10-variable Huisman-Vissing model, where the dynamics are driven by a step function, which drive these rapid oscillations. And so if we found method performance was affected by system dimensionality, we'd expect differences between rows. And if method performance was affected by nonlinearity, we'd expect differences between columns. So here I've shown on the vertical axis the proportion of interactions detected using the three methods. Importantly, when empirical estimates are equivalent to theory, then the proportion should be 0. And that's shown by the solid black line. And the results for AR modeling are in green, CCM are in purple, and GP are in pink. And then direct interactions are solid lines, and indirect interactions are dashed lines. So within the simplest case, the GP and AR performance was quite similar across most noise levels and slightly underestimated the correct number of direct interactions, but they overestimated the number of indirect interactions. And CCM also overestimates these indirect interactions, but estimates the correct number of direct ones. And then as dimensionality increases, AR and GP performance it worsens slightly, and then CCM performance is about the same. And then compared to the Lotka-Voltaire system, all three methods perform similarly on the Hastings-Powell systems, and the trend in performance going from lower to higher dimensional systems stays fairly consistent. And then as we increase the nonlinearity even further using the Huseman-Weising system, AR and GP always underestimate direct interactions, whereas CCM performance was similar. And so the two main takeaways is that CCM appears to be most useful for identifying which variables are in a complex system, whereas GP and AR are better at distinguishing those interaction pathways. So next I'll be applying these methods to understand the effects of environment and human drivers on body size evolution. Thank you.
Lofty? And you'll correct my pronunciation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malashri. I'm from Department of Politics, and my advisor is Dr. Dave Gordon. So my CCCR research is about the disaster preparedness in the Bay Area from the perspectives of communities and households. So as we know that, Bay Area is really prone to several disasters, from climate-induced disasters to geological disasters, and with multiple vulnerabilities: inequality, poverty, unplanned urbanization, and access to insurance and basic services. But I'm looking this from the gender perspective. So looking at the hazards and vulnerability and the capacity of women, men, boys, and girls, and diverse genders, if that be kind of permitted. So my research questions are: how do vulnerable households and communities perceive disaster preparedness and resilience in the context of multi-hazard coastal resilience? How do the needs and perceptions of households and communities match that of the community disaster management plans, and also the national, state, county plans and the visions for resilience? Where are the gaps and opportunities for gender and social inclusion? And vis-a-vis the state and the subnational plans. So I'm doing the policy analysis of the national, state level, county level, and the community emergency response management plans that are existing from the gender and social inclusion perspective. I'm doing key informant interviews with the local government, and I have partnered with the Department of Planning in Milpitas and the Office of Emergency Management. And I'm also interviewing CSOs and doing some ethnographic research as a CERT member for the Milpitas Office of Emergency Management. Then I'm also doing the household survey, which I have shared with this Office of Emergency Management, and they are kind of reviewing and will be sending it out. 2,000 households, and the GIS mapping, which will kind of overlay the disaster risk management layer with the socioeconomic indicators and the disaggregated data to see, where the vulnerability lies. So my early findings are that the national policies and the state level policies, as well as the Milpitas county level policies and the community emergency response frameworks, they are kind of gender blind. They do include, various social groups and their access and functional needs, but they don't include, specific differentiated needs for women, men, boys, and girls, and diverse genders. So, and there's a lack of gender analysis and a lack of access to disintegrated data for the emergency officers to implement their plans and programs, and also to kind of design the plans and programs. So thus, you will see that there's a kind of complete, there's a lack of, even mention of women, men, boys, and girls as their needs, and it's just a kind of usage of words like individuals, communities, yeah. So, and I also kind of found that, there were like CERT volunteers, which were from which didn't represent equal number of, women, men, and they were completely excluding the low-income people from the analysis and constitution. And then women's leadership also seems to be really positively growing, at least in Milpitas, where I'm kind of working, and it's also one of the CEDAW. US hasn't signed CEDAW, which is the Convention of Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. It's an international law. So US is like among the 5 countries, including Iran, Somalia, and Sudan, and who hasn't signed it. But the cities within US have signed that treaty, and Milpitas is one of them. So but still there is a kind of a lack of coordination between the emergency office and the other, other departments within the government. So, gender mainstreaming is really very lacking. Yeah, and I would be kind of working on my publications, like publication as well as the white papers for advocacy, and also some material for the community to understand the gender mainstreaming aspects in disaster risk management. Thank you.
Everyone, can you hear me all right if I don't use the microphone? Well, cool. Yes, so I'm Chris. I'm here at the visualization team. I'm a geospatial data scientist who's worked with Mike for several years at this call, advancing the state of building research that that team does. I work as a geospatial data scientist and visualization specialist, and so I usually end up here presenting results and models from other people that we've just put through cool visualizations. And so I'm here kind of in support of the overall team. Want to give credit where all of that is happening. Generally, we're really excited about data communication. We're really excited about fostering communities of practice around data. I'm not necessarily presenting statistical research here on the efficiency of that, but we're just talking about how to actually connect with stakeholders and drive communication campaigns and things like that. So we've been working on providing high quality visualizations around all of the research that is happening here, and it's been great to connect with everybody over the past many months, refining the methods for scientific communication, and including taking that on the road, doing conferences, working with new stakeholders, and generally developing all these technologies around like big data geospatial visualization. So something fun, let's like test the demo gods here, which is, some of you may have seen these before. This is a great visualization produced by our own team, Costello. And this is an Unreal Engine-driven visualization. So this is a GPU game engine, GPU-based game engine, where we're showing the progression of a storm and the flooding with and without coral reefs. So our team has modeled this across the entire Caribbean, now expanding to small and developing states and eventually globally. And we've produced models like this. And these visualizations are built to help people actually understand what type of model we have created and help them kind of connect with the data a little bit more. There's been lots of conversations where they're like, can you just like bullet point what this is? And we can say, I can really show you what this is. I'd say we generally have like 2 tracks. And so the first is this like Unreal Engine based visualization where we are showing a model in as much depth as we can to explain it to somebody so that you can go beyond like, we have built this type of model in very verbal language and into something like more real for them. The second that we have is more of this like decision support system workflow. And so this is where we can actually dive in and show specific results for the data, and you can toggle between counterfactuals. And so we kind of built out a lot of reusable components that everybody can use in research to showcase like large-scale geospatial data. When I started doing this type of research, like if you call it research, this type of engineering about 4 years ago, we were producing data even then that was much larger than any like hosting provider like ArcGIS could handle. So we kind of had to build a lot of it from scratch to be able to do things like visualize these 30-meter resolution global models. But we've kind of broken all of that down, and now we're pretty quick with building like large-scale geospatial data visualizations. I think that's just a good example of building products that people can actually dive into specific areas, and like we can have different conversations with people depending on where they want to go. So we've done a lot of work to kind of unblock that. These got out of order, there we go. So some of what we did in the last kind of quarter was to take this to UN Oceans, which was really awesome to be able to have visualizations in hand when we're talking to potential funders, stakeholders, other people in the coral resilience community. And so over a couple days, we made just a ton of connections, and actually are, people who are potentially turning into future funders or stakeholders of our data, and just trying to have those conversations on their specific place has been really powerful. It's this massive auditorium where we're just trying to get like a moment of people's time. So it's been kind of interesting figuring out just like how much value add you get from having that like next level of like high performance on these types of things. And then we've cracked a little bit into a few other things that we're working through. So we've started doing LLM integration into 3D applications. So what does it mean when you can pass like a 3D context into an LLM and ask questions of that? There's a PhD student who's pursuing that with us. And then some of that ties in with immersive coral visualizations in VR. So some of you have been doing these in-depth like Gaussian splats and things. We're doing that with lots of high-resolution coral data. And then we've built these kind of direct ties between Unreal Engine and backends that let you ask questions of the data in real time from these applications, even if it's like this massive geospatial scale problem. So that's us, yeah. We're building more things, and we would love to talk to you. And that's what's up.
Ray, you're up next, and then Jeremy.
Hi everyone, I'm Ray Taylor Burns. I'm a CCCR postdoctoral fellow, and today I am sharing about assessing risk and nature's benefits through a CCCR partnership with the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, or ORA. So ORA and the CCCR funded a partnership, and the mission of ORA is to drive investment into ocean and coastal nature-based solutions by pioneering finance and insurance products that build the resilience and adaptive capacity of marine and coastal ecosystems and the communities that rely on them. And this ties in really well with the work that Mike's research group has been doing over the years, focused on assessing flood risk and nature's benefits. So as part of this fellowship, I supported a project doing this in the Caribbean, where we assessed coastal risk, rigorously valued the benefits of reefs and wetlands across the Caribbean, and identified incentives to invest in solutions to reduce risk and enhance the environment. So at a really high level, this means using hydrodynamic models to assess the influence of coral reefs, which reduce wave heights as waves approach the shore based on qualities such as their forereef slope, reef crest, and reef flat, reducing nearshore water levels, and also quantifying the influence of mangroves. And mangroves reduce flood extents by slowing the movement of floodwaters over the land, causing reduced flood depths and extents. So we applied these models in the Dominican Republic, and results of that national level analysis are shown here. Coral reefs and mangroves combined in the DR protect 13,000 residents each year and reduce flood damages by nearly $500 million. And this is a visual of what that looks like in the DR. This is on the east coast of the DR, the Punta Cana area, which is very highly developed with tourism and like hotels and beach tourism infrastructure. And this figure is showing on the left flood damage to infrastructure from flooding with reefs and mangroves, and on the right is without reefs and mangroves. And you'll see that the figure on the right shows a lot more green and kind of these like splashes of yellow and red, which is high damage in this really densely developed area. And the scenario shown in this figure is a 200-year storm in 2050. We can do a similar type of analysis looking at population density. So again,
a similar pattern where we see that reefs and mangroves protect a lot of people in the Punta Cana region. And so how does any of this tie into insurance and finance tools, which, as I said, is kind of a key part of Aura's goal? And the answer is that by integrating nature's benefits into insurance pricing, we can open up funding for a lot of key needs. So we're calling this nature-based insurance. And by kind of like pioneering and advancing nature-based insurance products, we can fill the gap in climate adaptation funding, which is over $350 billion. Fill the gap in private sector adaptation finance, as well as the gap in funding for nature, which is being lost globally at an overwhelming rate. And then finally, nature-based insurance can also help address the problem of rising costs of insurance, which, as we know, in California, it's a big problem here, and it's causing increased housing costs and stuff across the state. So this is a problem globally as well, and nature-based insurance can help to solve it. So with Megan Kelso, we put together a paper exploring how nature's benefits can be integrated into insurance pricing, advancing nature-based insurance to reduce risk to people and nature. And this is a graphical abstract from that figure where we share about how modeling the benefits of nature well can lead to a couple innovations across, we call them frontiers of nature-based insurance, which can feed into more conservation and restoration of habitats, and then the habitats can reduce risk, reduce insurance payouts, and increase the viability of the insurance industry, as well as open up new nature-based markets and business opportunities for insurance. So we have this kind of like positive reinforcing loop between insurance and nature. So thank you so much.
Jeremy, and then Ben.
So hello, I'm Jeremy West. I'm a professor in the economics department. This is a project with my co-PI, Gray Skew, in econ, and then we've got lots of various grad students and undergraduates helping out with different components of this project. So the motivating background for our project, and no surprise to anybody in this room, is that weather disasters, climate change is becoming more significant, more severe globally, as well as in coastal regions around the United States. So for example, hurricanes and tropical storms in the Atlantic Basin have greatly increased over the last 160 years, partly because storms are becoming more frequent, partly for a bunch of other reasons. Disaster insurance policies are also becoming more expensive. It's becoming more and more expensive for homeowners and others to insure themselves against these risks. And meanwhile, on a more kind of optimistic note, climate risk information, such as information many of you contribute towards, is becoming more and more accessible. So it's easier for people to, or at least it's more feasible for people to understand the specific risks that a given piece of property may face, like the risks around the home that they may live in or may consider purchasing. So we have several research questions. This is a very broad project with lots of ongoing moving parts. But some of our fundamental questions that we're really interested in getting into here are, as home insurance prices related to disasters, so like flood insurance policies, for example, get more expensive, who opts into and out of coverage because of these higher prices? So of course, many people are going to be vulnerable for a lot of reasons and uninsured for many other factors. But specifically, as prices go up and people are kind of shocked at these higher prices of insurance, how does that change people's behavior is a big part of our question here. And when I say who, that can be very multidimensional in a way of thinking about that. So some of this is going to be socioeconomic. Some of this might be what are the circumstances financially that a given household is in that may lead them to dropping coverage, for example, of their homeowner's flood insurance policy. A second question related to this is, what do uninsured homeowners, people who have dropped their coverage, do when the disaster comes? So say somebody was uninsured and then their home gets hit by a hurricane and floods. Do they take on extra debt? Do they migrate away and move somewhere else? There are various channels that we may see as far as behaviors where people can react to these disasters, specifically when they're uninsured, doing things that might be different than they would have done had they had homeowners insurance or flood insurance to cover that disaster. And then finally, does information about homes' climate risk factor in these decisions? So you might think, for example, if you think there's a 1 in 100 chance that a home is going to get flooded, dropping that insurance policy is a different calculation than if the flooding is going to happen once every 10 years in expectation. So in order to look at these questions, we need lots and lots of data, rich data sets that we're linking together to try to systematically get at these. And that's where we're very grateful for support from the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience. So we're starting in the middle there. So our data needs are based around this comprehensive nationwide coverage of every real estate parcel of every type that's in the United States. And we're linking that together to a bunch of these other data sets that I've shown here. So for example, starting at the left, we have flood risk and other climate risk measures. So like how exposed is each piece of property. From Climate Check, we have data that we're linking in from the National Flood Insurance Programs that will know specifically whether each home is insured against disasters at different points in time. We're linking also exposures over here on the right. So we have high-resolution maps of where historical floods have actually happened so we can know which homes were actually exposed during different hurricanes and other flooding disasters. And then eventually we're in the process of working with the California Policy Lab to try to link all this together to this large consumer credit panel so then we can observe a lot more about the individuals who live in these homes, both in terms of their characteristics, leading to that like who might drop coverage type question, but then also what happens to them. For example, do people take on more debt when they're uninsured and the disaster happens? So just to give you one example of the type of components that this project is focusing on, FEMA had a reform to their national flood insurance program several years ago. They rolled out this reform during 2021 and 22. And one of the things this reform did is it tries to price flood insurance policies more directly connected to the specific risks of given properties. As you might expect, this is going to make flood insurance more expensive. This made flood insurance more expensive for homes that are in higher risk areas. And we find that this rollout caused a lot of homeowners to drop their coverage. Hurricanes have happened more recently that would have affected these uninsured homeowners, and so we're exploring kind of what happens to them throughout this project. And it's kind of is a nice sort of case study of the sort of variation that we're using to try to explore our research questions. And then ultimately, we hope these results from our study will be able to help inform public policies to try to reduce vulnerability to climate change and extreme weather events through insurance markets as well as through other policies and protections. Thank you very much. I'll be around afterwards and appreciate any feedback too.
Ben and then Patrick.
All right. Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a PhD student in the statistics department here at UCSC. I'm going to talk very briefly about statistical modeling of extreme coastal events. So this is part of work I'm doing alongside Borja here at Coastal Science. Robert Lund, he's my advisor in the statistics department, and Kurt Storlazzi and a couple other USGS scientists are involved as well. And what we're doing is using climate model data to quantify extreme events and potential changes in frequency of extreme events, and at coastal locations, around the world. And the sort of events that we're really concerned with are things like 100-year water levels, 100-year waves, even rarer versions of those events, 500-year water levels. So we're doing that using existing statistical theory for extremes, and we're also working on kind of developing that theory further, potentially being able to relax some of the strict assumptions made by the statistical models that are currently used to study these events. And what we're actually going to produce is we're going to update the Department of Defense coastal hazard database that's used by coastal engineers constructing coastal infrastructure. And of course, publish scientific results and statistical software related to our analyses. So I mentioned, whoa, this does not look quite like it should, but nevertheless, I mentioned a 100-year events in the previous slide, so I figured I would just define that before I show a visualization of those. And I think there's kind of a lot of misconception about what exactly a 100-year event means. That's a term that you'll hear if you watch the news or something like that. So a 100-year event is an event that's extreme enough that it's expected to be exceeded once every 100 years. And I had a mathematical definition that got pushed off the page for anyone who's more mathematically inclined. But the operative word in this definition is expected, because usually you're dealing with a random process. So, events are, these extreme events, 100-year events, do not happen on a perfect 100-year cadence. There's a variance. And you can see this is just an example of a realization of a very simple process. So this is a simulation where we know the true 100-year event. And this is 500 years of simulated, maybe weekly observations, I think. And all the red dots are events that are at least 100-year events. And there are, you can see that there's not one every 100 years. Some of them are clustered close together. There's a 100-year time span where we have 4 of them. There's almost 250 years where we don't observe any. So I think this is interesting because it, it illustrates an important point that you may not see a 100-year event in 250 years, or you may see 4 in 100 years. So studying these things is kind of a difficult statistical problem. But there is a theory that allows us to model these sorts of things. And what we've been doing is, using those models and fitting them to, this is ERA 5 reanalysis data. So this is backwards looking wave data from locations around the world. And we can fit models and use parameter estimates from those models to then estimate these really extreme events. So here's a plot of estimated 100-year return waves from around the world. And yeah, this is a pretty numerically intensive process. We've written, I guess, kind of state-of-the-art software for fitting these models, but we're really excited about having access to Elkhorn computing resources going forward, so we don't have to fight for space on Hummingbird to do this. But that's all I've got. Thank you to the CCCR for funding.
Patrick and then Yang-Kong.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm relatively new in the scene to the center here, just been around about 6 months, formerly with USGS for 21 years. But we really lean into this concept of resilience, and I spent the better part of my career trying to quantify what we're actually being resilient to. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're doing that and extending that work here at the center, both in terms of broadening our deeper knowledge of coastal hazards and also expanding geographically. So, a lot of recent work has really been focused on overland flooding, and this is a very, obviously, these are dramatic impacts. We see them all the time. We've had 3 very significant winters in California where it's really come to the forefront and being well showed off in the media. And but this is a flooding issue. It's a national issue. There's impacts across the country. We've built so much of our civilization this really sort of dynamic margin, and so it's just obviously not just for California. It's across the whole country. We see these major flooding issues, these erosion issues, and that's been a huge topic of research over the last 20 years. And not just obviously nationally, but also internationally as well. But I want to highlight one particular hazard, coastal groundwater, and how this is potentially just as significant as overland flooding and erosion. This was something of a passion project I took up about 10 years ago. We've since built some models and expanded them across the country. So this is the basic situation along the coast. We have a very shallow water table in the unconfined aquifer that's effectively controlled by sea level. We have a saltwater wedge. And with sea level rise, that water table is going to rise as well. In some cases, it's going to daylight at the surface. We're going to have shallower groundwater, and that saltwater wedge is going to move further inland. So no matter if we have a large sand berm, a huge wall, that rising water table is going to be a hazard regardless. So we have to think about holistically how we're going to plan for coastal resilience and sustainability and incorporate all these different hazards, not just flooding and erosion, but also groundwater hazards. And this is a common issue in a lot of cities right now across the country. Places like Miami are dealing with shallow groundwater, emerging groundwater on a daily basis. Also over in Honolulu. And more frequently right here in our own backyard, as during high tides, water comes up through the unconfined aquifer, through stormwater drains, and we have situations like this. So it's going to become more and more of an issue. We have to understand the future hazard here. So with Kevin Beefus, University of Arkansas, we built these linked overlapping mod flow models to look at the response of the water table to sea level rise. We did the pilot work in California. It's since been expanded across the country, everywhere now except for the Gulf Coast. We'll talk about that in a second. And so we're basically looking at the steady state rise of the water table through a bunch of different sea level rise scenarios, and then developing maps of groundwater emergence and flooding. This is an example from the San Francisco Peninsula showing areas in red where we predict that the water table will begin to daylight at the surface. And then the other warmer colors where it's getting very, very shallow. And you can see ground zero is basically the San Francisco airport. So, they're currently investing over $100 million in a levee system there, but perhaps groundwater pumping is going to become also an issue that's going to be required as well. So why do we care? Okay, so shallower water tables can basically liberate pollutants in the soil, reintroduce those into the environment. It can cause issues for buried infrastructure, including public utilities, pipelines, sewage, septic systems, undermine road foundations, undermine infrastructure foundations, and lots of other factors like that. And we've done this exposure analysis and compare it to flooding in all these different regions across the country. And the take-home message is that the societal exposure of groundwater hazards is almost an order of magnitude higher than overland flooding. So exposure does not equal impacts. However, it is very significant and has to be considered as we move forward. So next steps, what are we doing at the center? Well, we want to provide a non-federal platform to communicate the risk of groundwater hazards and serve up the data, especially with the current dismantling of the federal scientific enterprise. And so we're trying to collate all this information and have it publicly available. We want to complete a lower 48 assessment of groundwater hazards with a Gulf Coast analysis, which is the only gap in the data set right now. And then work with the team here to develop some game engine visualizations to better communicate groundwater hazards. We have the above ground overland flooding nailed, and we want to start to bring in the below ground impacts as well. And then continue to work with agencies and communities to translate groundwater hazards into impacts. And then evaluate risk reduction actions that consider groundwater hazards. Finally, I want to just highlight one other project we're working on right now. And this goes along with the center's effort to evaluate climate solutions at the local level. This is for the Nature Conservancy. We're working on quantifying the benefits of nature-based solutions in the Pajaro Estuary and Danger-Mon Preserve. So I'll stop there.
And then Gonzalo.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zheng Tong Yang, and I'm a postdoc within the center. So basically, I don't think I can speak as fast as others since I have been here only for 1 year. Anniversary today, maybe. So today, I'm very happy to share our progress with the Cosmos Adapt. Basically, it's assessing coastal adaptation strategies in California using the Cosmos Adapt framework. So PI is the Professor Boha, and this is a joint work with contributions from other modeling teams and also professors and students in economics. So there are two goals that we are mainly want to achieve. The first one is to advance our understanding of the characterization of the coastal risks and the climate change, including tipping points, and also to conduct a quantitative evaluation of adaptation strategies, cost-benefit analysis, and their spatial distributions. So our study has carried out throughout 3 sites and including 7 municipalities, and we are trying to use these areas as pilot sites to further scale up to statewide applications. And obviously, Santa Cruz is a very nice example, and I will present my work mainly on Santa Cruz. So our methodology basically integrates the long-term impacts and the short-term impacts on the coastal erosion and flooding. So for the long-term things, we are using the Cosmos Coast to predict shoreline evolutions in the next century. And for the short-term impacts, we use the high-fidelity numerical modeling XBeach to simulate the storm scale responses. So we first simulate the current scenario, 2025, what are the erosion and the flooding, and with and without adaptation, how does it look like, and we calculate the social economics. And later we use the long-term shoreline projections and also the sea level rise, projected wave climate to calculate what is the risks in 2055, and also consider the adaptation and the social economics. And we further advance to the end of the century to see what is happening like in 60 years. And we'd like to answer how does the risks and adaptation scenario changes over this 60 years, and how does the adaptation scenarios cost-benefit changes, especially who pays. Basically, we want to answer who pays and who benefits. So as a validation and benchmarking, we simulate the bomb swell events, which happens in 2023, which caused unprecedented damages to Santa Cruz. And so I replicate this storm events using XFish simulation. And thanks to the visualization team, we can see all the impacts of this wave. So basically, we did a qualitative comparison. So as for the main beach, this is a video camera captured storm events, which installed at the Holiday Inn Hotel there. And you can see the flooding is pretty much consistent on the main beach. And you can also see very strong wave impacts right there at the West Cliff. And this is probably the reason for this cliff erosion on the right, on this corner. So we have produced more than 100 flooding maps for each site, considering different climate scenarios, different adaptation scenarios, and also hydrodynamics and morphodynamics. And this is very high resolution with 2 meters resolution. And this is an example for 100-year return period storm events happens in Santa Cruz and Capitola. You can see the boardwalk or the downtown is flooded severely, and also Capitola is in a kind of dangerous situation. Yeah. And we also, as we mentioned before, we also did a projection of the future flooding risks. So this is in left is the Santa Cruz, right is the Capitola in 2025, 55, and 85. So you can see the flooding risk increase significantly over the next century. And we also calculate the damages induced by this flooding. So some simple take-home message is that, so compared to the current scenario, the damage caused by the flooding can go up to 60% for the 100-year return period storm events to the middle century, and it could increase by 55% until the end of the century. We are considering the 100 years return period. And if you are considering 5 years return period, it's quite normal. The nonlinear increase, it can go up to 80%. So you can see that the damage is increased very significantly over the century. Yeah. And we also evaluate the performance of adaptations. So basically, we study the seawalls, dunes, and the reefs. And that one is the no adaptation. So basically, the seawall provides the greatest protections from the flooding, and the nature-based solutions like dunes can provide very substantial protections. For reef, it's the least effective, but it could be very important for the long-term shoreline evolutions by dissipating waves near shore. Yeah. So, and lastly, we also carry out the cost-benefit analysis. So we divided each site into several cost-benefit units, and we calculate the cost and benefits to say, like, what's the performance of the dunes and the reef and the seawalls. So some take-home message is dunes can be highly effective. Seawalls is very effective, but may not be the most cost-effective one. Yeah, and lastly, some conclusions. We are contributing to the 5th climate assessment, and we are hoping to scale up these projects to the statewide. Thank you.
Gonzalo, and then Andrea.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gonzalo, and I'm a PhD student in the film department here at UCSC. I'm in my 6th year, so hopefully finishing up soon. I'm going to introduce my project I'll try to do it briefly, and then try to show you many images of this project. That'll be sort of the order. Okay, so my project is an artistic research project, and it's part of a practice-based dissertation in my department. It's grounded in the field of environmental art and experimental film and video art. The dissertation investigates contemporary environmental art practices and methods, and particularly those centered around place-based practices and elemental matter. In this dissertation, I analyze and evaluate the methods applied to produce contemporary environmental artworks, and I experiment and test my own methods in the field. And I'm speaking to a room full of scientists, so I try to do this to make art understandable. So primary objective was to propose a new mode of engagement with changing environmental condition through experiments with video and sound feedback, which is just a technique in video and sound. And I'm trying to think of fog as an artistic material to collaborate with. The project takes place at UC reserves along the Central Coast during the spring and summer months when it's foggy. I've started this research 2 years ago, so this is my third summer doing this. And I've integrated a lot of field work to observe fog presence and conditions, and to then design experimental performances that are site-specific and weather-dependent. The main outcome will be an audiovisual artwork and an exhibition, and the status is that I am currently reviewing everything I've shot and preparing it for exhibition. So I want to briefly say, what is environmental art? Environmental art is a broad term that encompasses practices and artworks made with traditional and non-traditional media, but they tend to have some combination of engagement with the environment as either a site or as the medium or as the subject of the work to various degrees or in applying different strategies. In my own practice, I focus on direct encounter with the elements that make up a place, and often the specific weather conditions in the site determine the parameters of the work. This is a quote by Amanda Boykes that I think neatly explains what I'm trying to do. It's about a bodily contact and a sensorial experience with the natural phenomena. And it's to create an aesthetic experience and hopefully also an ethical encounter. Okay, so I'm gonna show you some of the sites. This is Big Creek. It's one of our reserves at our university. This is a view looking from the, towards the ocean, south to north. You can see the fog at different elevations. When I'm out here, I'm observing fog presence, how it moves through the landscape. And then I design and test these experiments with video feedback, which this idea came to me after having done a lot of field recording and collaborating on a project about fog, and spending a lot of time listening to owls at nighttime. I noticed fog and its rhythm. And so I've been working with video feedback, which is a technique that generates a delay. And the idea here is to try to hold on to fog for a millisecond if the general pattern is that fog is disappearing from the coast. So these are different experiments with light. And yeah. Okay, thank you.
Andrea, and then Rachel.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrea Paz-Lacabex. I'm a PhD student in the Raimondi Car Lab. I'm also a recent CCCR fellow. So this project is still ongoing. I'm gonna walk you through the framework of the project. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife is currently developing the California Artificial Reef Program, so it's under planning. The objective of artificial reefs are to facilitate the production of fish, invertebrates, and algae, for example, for sport fishing, or to mitigate the loss of biodiversity. In California, we have the amazing rocky reefs that are habitated by kelp forests that provide support species-rich communities. They are foundation species, ecological engineers. They provide habitat for hundreds of species and provide critical ecosystem services to humans, such as fisheries and nutrient cycling. So for my CCR fellowship, I'm working to try and identify the environmental and ecological features of artificial reefs that foster large and stable kelp forests. So to do this, I'm taking you to Southern California, to San Clemente, where the largest artificial reef of the world has built, called the Wheeler North Artificial Reef. It was built between 1999 and 2020. It has 151 hectares of quarry rock with the goal to mitigate the loss of kelp and reef derived from the San Onofre nuclear generation station. And the way this effectiveness is measured is via the long-term ecological monitoring program that is done every year via subtidal monitoring. And for this research, I'm gonna use the last 15 years of data to try and answer what environmental and ecological attributes of this artificial reef can explain variation in giant kelp abundance and stability. But how do we measure stability? We have a broad audience here, so sorry for those data savvy. I'm gonna walk you through what the coefficient of variation is. The coefficient of variation is basically how jumpy our data is. In this case, we have two quadrats that have been measured over time. In this case, we have time in the x-axis and mean stipes on the y-axis. This is the stipes or fronds from the kelp. And we can see that one of them is more jumpy than the other, one in yellow, one in green. The one in yellow has the highest coefficient of variation, and we would call that as an unstable quadrat. But what if we have two quadrats with the same coefficient of variation? They may look like this, with one having higher biomass than the other. So for highly stable sites, we will be looking at quadrats that have low jumpiness or low coefficient of variability and high mean type density. And we can study this data not just at the quadrat level, but at multiple scales. For example, we have two reefs next to Wheeler North that are natural reefs that we can compare our data set to. At each reef, we have 41 stations of 200 meters squared. Each site has 2 stations, and each station has 5 quadrats of 20 meters square, where kelp, algae, invertebrate, and substrate are described every year. And if we were to study how kelp is variable at these different scales and run a little bit of stats, we would be looking at a graph like this, where we have percent of total variation on the y-axis and our scales of interest in the x-axis. Sorry for those mismatched letters. But basically, we can see here that the highest variation is explained at the quadrat levels. So there's things going on at the quadrat level that can help explain how kelp is variable. And those things can be ecological and environmental variables such as temperature or rugosity or other turf algae that kelp forests depend on for stability, persistence, connectivity, etc. If we go back to our example of the quadrats and we were to look at one single quadrat or one single grade point right there, each of them has a mean type density and a mean coefficient of variability. And the relationship looks more or less like this. But I want you to pay attention on the green circle right there. These are quadrats that would have the highest stability over time. We have a large mean type density and low coefficient of variability, and the unstable sites will be on the top left. So there are processes happening at the quadrat level on the bottom right that we want to extract so that we can inform future climate-ready reefs in California. And our data actually looks like that. So with that, I want to extract the attributes that support abundant and stable kelp forests so that we can inform the design of future artificial reefs in California. Thank you so much.
Rachel, and then I'll wrap us up after that.
Cool, thanks. Hi, my name is Rachel Meyer. I'm in the EEB department, and I direct the California Environmental DNA program that has spun out a company called eDNA Explorer that then got some funding to expand into Canada and start to connect biodiversity data all along the California coast, and then also thinking globally about what we can do with lots of connected, harmonized biodiversity data. And fortunately, CCCR sponsored the development of these 4 really exciting workshops that are happening right now. We just had our first one last week, where we're trying to tackle challenges and close gaps on how to use biodiversity in risk and resilience modeling. So this is co-funded by CCCR and also the Genome British Columbia organization, and brings together people in nature tech,
different executives that have decision support tools that they make, and also lots of ecological consultants, tribes. We've had a lot of different people at these at this first meeting, and next week we have our coastal buffer zones meeting. So if you are really interested in this topic and want to come, or know someone, please let me know. I have 4 spots left. And the workshop objectives are to deal with this current state of affairs and really explore decision-making frameworks and communicate with each other on how we can integrate biodiversity data and really tackle nature positive. Oh, the slide disappeared. Okay. It might come back. Well, anyways, we bring in eDNA data as an example because, of course, my interest is in how that can actually serve this community. And we've seen some really exciting decision support tools where in the workshops people are actually playing with those tools. So I don't know what I did, but I'm done. Thanks.
Hey, Rachel, much apology. I'm sorry. But which also just gives me a chance to note that all of the slides and presentations we will be making available. There's video recording mostly so that we can use, and there will be some photos. We'll do a little bit of social media around that. I get to give a short talk and then wrap it up because I'm still excited about being able to do research too, every once in a while. What I want to talk about is 3 things that are coming out right now or in the next few weeks where we're really trying to rigorously value nature and then use those values to be able to identify incentives for investing in nature. You've seen from a few of the presentations, sort of our broad scale approach for assessing flooding with and without habitats or other adaptation measures. And then being able to quantify those benefits, so assessing risks, valuing benefits, identifying incentives. On Tuesday, we had one of our papers released. This has been a long road, but this is with Moody's, so that's the large risk rating firm. So it's very important that we used risk models from the industry to value the benefits of mangroves in Florida. And we showed using their model for both hurricanes Ian and Irma, and I'll just show Ian here on the left, that mangroves, without mangroves, damages would have increased by some $4.1 billion. So a really significant benefit of mangroves over a relatively small area. Importantly, you actually see, again, in the industry's model that there are these hatched areas in front there. Basically, it turns out that if you build in front of your defenses, you get flooded more often. And we show that in the industry model. We also showed annual benefits in Collier County of some $67 million per year. So quite significant annual benefits. In the next few weeks, we'll have a study coming out using Zillow home sales data. And this is work led by Ted Liu from economics and done with Galena Hale. This is a totally new approach for our team in understanding the value and benefits of habitats. And so what we looked at is more than 1 million records of home sales data in the years following 3 major hurricane seasons on the East Coast. And what you see at the 0, so that's when the storm seasons hit overall. And then we look at home sales data, various distances from mangroves. And with a bunch of regression analyses, we factor out a whole variety of different elements. But what you can see from these graphs is, after heavy storm seasons, and this is not the damage to individual properties. This is just home sales data anywhere throughout 7 counties in Florida. Not surprisingly, if there's been heavy storm seasons, you're a little wary about buying a coastal home. Prices go down. The closer you are to mangroves, the less those prices go down, and the faster they start to rebound. This represents about $60,000 in benefit per $1 million of home value. So really significant when you spread it out over huge areas just on the perception of risk and benefits from these habitats. Okay, and then hopefully, maybe at the UN Climate COP coming up in just a month, we will finally be able to announce the verified method for assessing resilience credits. So we worked with Vera, which is essentially one of the bodies that verifies models for accounting for climate reduction benefits, mostly applied to mitigation credits, so how much carbon, as we saw in some earlier talks, that wetlands are soaking up. What we're now able to do is put a verified methodology through that allows us to calculate the adaptation credits of those benefits, and then it's based on methods and models that we've developed and has access to our data as the deemed estimate methodology, such that you can go in our Coastal Resilience Explorer tool, identify the area where you're thinking about a project, put in the size of that, and get the total credit value for that, opening up whole new pathways for financing that. I'm not going to go into how that can advance adaptation markets. Talk to me about that later. Again, thank you very much. All right, I'm gonna say just a few concluding remarks and then send us on to happy hours and discussions. Okay, one, I hope you've appreciated how much awesome and excellent work is happening, and I know that every one of the researchers would go, that's just skimming the surface of what we're doing in any one of those projects. This was 30 projects. That was a lot. There's still another 70 more of those that has been supported in the past few years. So. I sort of feel like, and great for all the stories and the communications and everything that we've been able to get out about the work so far, but I really only think it's the tip of the iceberg, because most of you know the work is just starting to come to fruition for many of you. So really expect a lot more. What we're here to do together is to try to figure out how we understand what the state of the work is, and then how we can help communicate and expand the impact of that for you. I often get asked, what's going to happen to the center? Don't worry, the center's still going to be here. We have support for the next few to several years. We've had very strong support from campus. We haven't needed financial support in the present times, but we've had very strong support, and I expect that to continue. It won't be the kind of $20 million slug that we were able to help support all of this work with, but we will be here in many aspects to help advance the impacts of the work. So there isn't some question about that. I also want to say that I'm really grateful for the amount of partnerships that we've been able to establish all across campus. And I mean, I think you've heard and seen some of the breadth of that, but it really is with many of the other centers who've been pulling together with us, whether it's the Coastal Science and Policy Program, the Science Communications Program, with Galena, the Institute of Social Transformation, with Eric and Christina, our partnerships here with IMS, Jonathan and the Seymour Center, ITS, and the development of Elkhorn. So it really has been kind of like a campus-wide push and pulling together of our efforts around climate resilience. And it's been, okay, I can't believe that I almost just said it was easy to do. Because that wouldn't be quite true. It wasn't hard to do on any one of those things. Everybody was working together to pull. That was really all. Never felt like there was friction in any of those relationships. And I'm deeply appreciative of that, kind of across the center. It's been a lot, but no friction in any of those relationships. Very strong support, as I said, all the way up through top leadership at campus. Always felt like they've helped to put wind at the backs of the work here in coastal climate resilience. So really appreciative of that. Wanted to thank a few people, Stephanie running the timer, but also work that we're doing to help set up some viz walls around campus. Infrastructure projects are new to me, and they have actually been among the more challenging things we tried to do, but we're getting there. Want to thank Patrick, Heather, and Bryony, who are our senior fellows, working very closely with the center on many aspects. And Pam, my special thanks to Pam. Anybody who knows my organizational abilities know that somebody else is behind a great deal of this, and that is most definitely Pam. We take a lot of pride in being able to run a professional office, being able to move quickly, and a lot of that, and many of you know, because you interact with Pam more than anybody, and she has really been the backbone of this effort, deeply appreciative of that. So, thank you. And then with that, just really deeply appreciative of all the work that you're doing, and looking forward to all the stories we get to tell and the impact that we can have. So let's enjoy ourselves. Thank you.